Chapter 203. The few of them nodded helplessly. The man asked, "Who's going to fight me?" The man with the bun raised his head proudly and stabbed the bloody katana into the ground. "I'll continue. No problem." His words were clear. It was no problem for him to deal with several people by himself. This was simply showing off. The man was not angry. He blinked and said, "Then can we start now?" The man with the bun nodded. The man immediately raised his hand, and 6 arm-length short knives immediately flew towards the man with the bun. As soon as the short knives flew over, the man with the bun vigilantly erected a fire shield for himself and prepared to block. However, the 6 knives stabbed into the ground beside his feet, forming an irregular hexagon. The man with the bun couldn't help but laugh. Wasn't this person's control too bad? How did he become the representative of the Celestial Empire? Was there no one else in the Celestial Empire? Without waiting for him to finish laughing, the man suddenly pressed his palm down. The rumbling sound of the explosion was almost deafening. Broken soil splattered everywhere, and half of an arm with a katana fell on the table in front of the Japanese representative. After the explosion stopped, the place where the man with the bun was originally standing had turned into a huge pit. Beside the pit were pieces of limbs that were scattered all over the place. If the vice captain of Mad Demon had died miserably, then this man with the bun was a tragic sight. At least the vice captain of Mad Demon had an intact corpse. Even if he was cut in half, he could still bury them together. What about the one in front of him? He couldn't even bury them together. The man brushed his bangs and said perfunctorily, "I thought he was very powerful, so I used more strength. Who would have thought that he wouldn't be able to withstand the first move? This has nothing to do with me." The man with the bun had only been pretending for 2 minutes before his face was slapped back. Moreover, his entire body was smashed into pieces. More importantly, the man stood there and didn't intend to go down. "Then, one more of you can come up. I think that with this level, I can take on the entire field alone." Kai Yingying laughed from below. "He's too proud of us. He has to slap our faces like this." As expected of the leader of the Dark Thorn, "I've decided. In the future, my Prince Charming will be Zhu Machin, and my goddess will be Wu Jiaojiao." In the end, the man called Zhu Machin was unable to continue slapping his face because he was dragged away by his vice-captain. The Onmyoji sitting at the very front unfolded his clothes and said humbly, "It's said that the Celestial Empire is vast and full of talents. It really lives up to its reputation. I'll take on the remaining 2 matches. Being able to spar with a few experts makes this trip worth it." Naturally, no one would say anything if he wanted to take on 2 matches. This was his ability. If he didn't have the ability and dared to say such big words, he could only be slapped in the face. A young man walked out from the higher-ups of the base and got into position to spar with the Onmyoji. The 2 of them exchanged names, and Xiaoqing learned that the Onmyoji was called Abe Shizuke. He was wearing a kimono and didn't carry any weapons. He only had a fan in his hand, which had words that even Xiaoqing couldn't understand. He stood in the middle of the field, and his aura was very calm. However, the paranormals on the base could not help but feel nervous. There were already thin energy fluctuations emanating from his body. However, in comparison, he was not as good as Abe Shigeki. Is he related to Abe Saimai? Gu Pampan bit her finger and asked in a low voice. If one were to ask about Japan's Onmyoji, the most famous one would definitely be Abe Saimai. Abe Shizuke just happened to have the same surname as Abe Saimai, which made Gu Pampan curious. Abe Saimai's branch of the Onmyoji lineage had a gap and directly died out. The last Onmyoji of the Abe family had a female disciple. After the Abe family's bloodline died out, she gave birth to a child with her husband, and let the child take on the surname Abe. Abe Shizuke should belong to this branch. Xiaoqing explained seriously. However, Gu Pampan would probably treat it as gossip. If it weren't for the arrival of the apocalypse and the appearance of zombies, paranormals, and those mutated animals and plants, Gu Pampan would definitely think that the Onmyoji were also a legendary existence. The Onmyoji called Abe Shizuke bowed politely and began to move. When he moved, it was impossible to tell what kind of paranormal he was. This was because no matter if the paranormals on the base released fire blades or fireballs, He would use the fan in his hand to easily block them. His other hand was always behind his back. This kind of attitude was really too arrogant. The paranormals gradually became angry. He pushed Abe Shizuke away with a ring of fire. Then he used nearly 3 seconds to condense his power. Finally, a ring of red light suddenly appeared under Abe Shizuke's feet. Scorching flames erupted like a volcano and drowned Abe Shizuke. The moment Shiroyuki Abe was submerged, many people breathed a sigh of relief. However, Xiaoqing's heart skipped a beat because she saw the space behind the Esper from the base suddenly fluctuate, and then a figure appeared. This figure was none other than Abe Shizuke, who had just been submerged. He raised his folding fan and 3 green lights formed a diamond-shaped light blade and stabbed towards the paranormal's back. This was clearly a wind blade. Teleportation should belong to the space element, and wind blade should belong to the wind element. Could it be that he was a dual-element paranormals? Xiaoqing could be considered a dual-element paranormals now. In addition to the wood element that she completely controlled, Xiaoqing also comprehended some space abilities. Although she was still not proficient in using space, she only lacked time. If she was allowed to become a dual-element paranormals, why couldn't others be allowed to do the same? However, Abe Shizuke quickly changed her view, because the paranormals from the base weren't weak. After sensing the killing intent, he rolled forward and dodged the wind blade. At this time, Abe Shizuke stretched out his hand and a vine drilled out from the ground, trying to bind the paranormal's ankles. Triple element. Chapter 204. Vine Fireball Earth Shield. Shizuyuki Abe used 5 different abilities in succession, which made the jaws of the onlookers drop to the ground. How to describe it? For an ordinary person to become an ability user, it was already a great fortune, but Shizuyuki Abe actually had 5 different abilities. This discovery made the paranormal from the base a little flustered. He had a preconceived notion that he would lose. In the end, he was knocked out of the field by Shiroyuki Abe's folding fan. Although Shiroyuki Abe's movements were very elegant, when the paranormal left the field, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face instantly turned pale. His internal organs were injured. If he didn't take a good rest, it would be a big hindrance to his future promotion. More importantly, after this paranormal left the field, the base couldn't send out a second person to compete with Shiroyuki Abe. It wasn't that there was no one in the base, but that no one thought that they could beat the paranormal who lost. If they lost this last round, they would lose a lot of face in this friendly competition. However, in this situation, no one dared to say that they could beat Abe Shizuke. He had already displayed 5 types of abilities. Looking at how skillful he was, who knew if he still had other tricks up his sleeves? The field suddenly fell into a deadlock. Some people were eager to try, but no one dared to stand out and try. A few of the stronger paranormal, such as Wu Jiaojiao, had already fought before. If they fought again, wouldn't people say that there was no one in the Celestial Empire? Xiaoqing sat quietly. She had the urge to go down and try, but she didn't want to expose herself. Although strength could be used as a deterrent, she didn't have any great power, so there was no need for that. Now the biggest problem Xiaoqing was facing was actually Air Dai. Instead of showing off, it was better to think about how to rescue Air Dai without anyone knowing. In fact, she had another choice, which was to ambush Shiroyuki Abe and Shiroyuki Abe when they left Kyoto and rescue Air Dai by force. However, a long delay could lead to many problems. Xiaoqing was afraid that something would happen during this period. She didn't want to see any damage to Air Dai, so it was better to save Air Dai as soon as possible. Xiaoqing gritted her teeth and suddenly stood up. She spoke in fluent Japanese. "Mr. Onmyoji, I would like to experience your ability. But before that, I have something to discuss with you." When she stood up, Xiaoqing had already made up her mind. The worst-case scenario was that she would forcefully take Air Dai away. If anyone tried to stop them, it would definitely be the Japanese. Killing them would not be a pity. Instead, it would be quite satisfying. The worst thing she could do was to launch a zombie siege. So what if she had to go against the entire human race? As long as the people she cared about were fine, that was enough. "May I know what this beautiful young lady wants to discuss with me?" Abe Shizuke elegantly listened to her. Xiaoqing pointed at Air Dai and said, The young man over there is my relative. He was accidentally lost. I don't know what happened to him. He will be in your team. I hope you can bring him back. Qiu Xiao and Izzy said without thinking, that's not possible. But soon she seemed to think of something. After all, such a decisive refusal, and the other party was Erdai's relative, sounded a little unreasonable. It was not an enemy, but a relative who wanted to reunite with Erdai. Wasn't it cold-blooded for her to refuse? Qiu Xiao Izzy bit her lower lip and couldn't help but look at Erdai. Erdai didn't look to the side or the ground as usual. Instead, he looked at Xiaoqing with a warm and gentle gaze that she had never seen before. Chapter 205. At that moment, Qiu Xiao Izzy knew that what Xiaoqing said was true. Qiu Xiao Izzy's nose twitched, and she felt a little sad. The first time she saw Erdai, she sneaked out and encountered a mutant beast. Erdai happened to pass by. He was in a hurry to run south, but when he saw the group of mutant beasts, he turned around. He was a little injured in the midst of a group of mutant beasts. He looked very fierce. Qiu Xiao Izzy felt that she was like a princess who had been saved by a hero. Her heart was full of indescribable feelings. Of course, that was because Qiu Xiao Izzy didn't know that Erdai just wanted to get some high-grade crystals and bring them back to Xiaoqing. Later, Abe and Shizuki came. There was a communication barrier between the two sides, and Erdai was hot-tempered. As a result, there was a conflict. Erdai certainly couldn't beat so many paranormals. Besides, he had a lot of secrets that he couldn't show to others. Therefore, Erdai was caught. Naturally, Qiu Xiao Izzy was reluctant to let Erdai become a prisoner. In her heart, Erdai was the hero who saved her. However, Erdai went crazy once and tried to leave several times, so she had to trap Erdai. Now the person that Erdai really cared about was here. She wanted to trap Erdai, but she had no excuse. Even so, Qiu Xiao Izzy still didn't want to hand over Erdai so easily. She pretended to be spoiled and said, if you can defeat Shizuki, then I will give him to you. If you lose, I won't give him to you. Xiaoqing's original plan was to avoid using force as much as possible, but with the situation in front of her, it was impossible not to use force. She calmly said, then please enlighten me, Yin-Yang Master. Xiaoqing's approach was actually very abrupt. After all, the people present were all famous paranormals in Kyoto, and she was not famous at all. Speaking of which, she was not qualified to stand up or even speak. Therefore, a few superpowered people who thought they were smart immediately stood up to stop her. If you're not capable enough, don't come out and embarrass yourself. This is not your home. Xiaoqing didn't even look at them and walked straight ahead. The paranormals didn't even have a chance to fight back. They only felt as if they were pushed away by an invisible hand. They couldn't even get close to Xiaoqing. The other people who had objections also stopped talking at this moment. The higher-ups looked at each other and finally acquiesced. Anyway, no one stood out now, and Xiaoqing seemed to have some ability. More importantly, Xiaoqing was just a nobody. Even if she lost, it wouldn't be too embarrassing. Xiaoqing stood in the middle of the field. The two of them faced each other, and the atmosphere was completely different. If Abe Shizuki gave people the feeling of a harmonious spring breeze with hidden killing intent, then Xiaoqing was a pool of still water. She looked calm without waves, but no one knew what kind of undercurrent was surging underneath. The two of them stood in the middle, and didn't immediately start fighting. Instead, they chatted for a while. The first to speak was Abe Shizuki. He suddenly said, in your language, miss, you look very familiar. Have we met before? Xiaoqing shook her head. Probably because I look more ordinary, I haven't met a Yin-Yang Master before. I like opponents like you, miss. This one is Abe Shizuki. Abe Shizuki introduced himself very seriously. Currently, I'm the current Shushin Guardian. The Shushin was Abe Saimai's ancestral temple. The previous Shushin must have been a Japanese astronomer who was best at divination. The astronomer here wasn't a degree, but a special existence in Japan. It was a very important position in the Yin-Yang Liao. Abe Shizuki didn't mention his position, but his inheritance. This showed that he actually valued Xiaoqing very much. Chapter 206. Although Xiaoqing didn't have much contact with it, she had heard of it. Just like there were Onmyoji warriors in Japan, there were also ancient martial arts passed down from generation to generation in the Celestial Empire. Although it wasn't as powerful as in novels and TV shows, it was far superior to things like Muay Thai, Sanda, and Judo. She was afraid that Abe Shizuka would misunderstand her as a descendant of ancient martial arts. Xiaoqing wasn't prepared to explain. She said lightly, "Xiaoqing." Then she was ready to attack. Even in front of so many people, she wasn't going to hold back anymore, because nothing was more important than Dai. She had to win this battle. "Please." Abe Shizuka still stretched out his hand politely, and his wide sleeves hung down naturally. Suddenly a breeze blew, and his sleeves moved slightly. It wasn't the wind, but Xiaoqing's vines broke out of the ground, causing the air to flow. Countless vines were like sharp spears, stabbing at the soles of Abe Shizuka's feet. He stroked his hand down and flames spewed out. Xiaoqing's vines weren't afraid of fire, but Abe Shizuka's flames still blocked the vines for a moment. At this moment, Abe Shizuka used the recoil force to temporarily float in the air for a moment. In the next second, countless air currents carried him away from the vines soaring into the sky. Xiaoqing had already appeared beside Abe Shizuka at this time, and a solid punch landed on Abe Shizuka's body. A layer of water suddenly appeared on Abe Shizuka's body. The power of the water circle was very soft, but it pushed Xiaoqing nearly a meter away, and the distance between them immediately increased. But when Xiaoqing and Abe Shizuka's water circle came into contact, she felt that something was wrong. The feeling that the water circle gave her wasn't like a pure water ability. With this doubt, Xiaoqing commanded the vines to harass Abe Shizuka, and she once again launched an attack on Abe Shizuka's body. Several times in a row, she deliberately used her body to block Abe Shizuka's attacks. In the eyes of outsiders, it looked like she was being attacked continuously and was about to lose, but she was very happy. This was because she had discovered Shiroyuki Abe's secret. Shiroyuki Abe was not a multi-elemental esper. After all, having 2 elemental espers was already very powerful, and having 3 elemental espers was even more heaven-defying. Xiaoqing first noticed that all of Abe Shizuka's ability attacks had similar energy fluctuations. Although the water ability was no different from the general water ability, it didn't have the unique characteristics of water. To put it simply, his special ability was only on the surface, but it did not have the most important part, such as the heat of the flames and the vitality of the wood element. In that case, Shiroyuki Abe should have a special ability to assimilate her own energy into various types of abilities. After discovering this, Xiaoqing was very steady. She fought steadily, harassing with vines while constantly releasing daughter seeds. The daughter seeds were all attached to the surface of Abe Shizuka's body. They didn't penetrate deeply, and then silently absorbed his energy. Abilities weren't endless. Sooner or later, they would be exhausted. Xiaoqing had brought this time forward. To be honest, Xiaoqing's various abilities were more suitable for chaotic situations. She would be at a disadvantage if she fought alone. However, Xiaoqing was extremely calm. She continuously probed Abe Shizuka, and then discovered that Abe Shizuka's ability wasn't very destructive. At least compared to Zhu Machen's metal that could explode, or her poisonous vines with thorns, it was a bit less destructive. Of course, the most important thing was that Xiaoqing wanted to analyze Abe Shizuka's weakness. She continuously fought, and only used her vines to harass Abe Shizuka and observe his condition. Chapter 207. She had more energy than the average ability user. Shiroyuki Abe's level was not higher than hers, so normally speaking his energy was not as good as Xiaoqing's. Just as Xiaoqing expected, after a long time, Shiroyuki Abe suddenly paused for a moment. This was a sign that there was a momentary break in the energy supply. Xiaoqing immediately launched an attack. The first thing she did was to tear open space. The so-called teleportation was actually breaking the barrier between 2 spaces, and then going from one position to another. For example, Xiaoqing went from where she was standing to directly behind Shiroyuki Abe. To Xiaoqing's surprise, Shiroyuki Abe also disappeared. He actually appeared where Xiaoqing was. In other words, both of them had the ability to teleport. They wanted to sneak attack each other at the same time, so they appeared behind each other's original position at the same time. Thus, no one could sneak attack the other. This was simply a huge coincidence. After this, it would be much more difficult to use a similar method to sneak attack. After all, the other party was already prepared. Xiaoqing was not willing to take risks regarding air dye. She would rather fight steadily and spend more time grinding with Shiroyuki Abe. Thus the situation in the field was like this. You throw a fireball or something, I use a vine shield to block it. My vines fly over. You use the wind to help yourself dodge. Not to mention the spectators, even Gu Pampan and the others were starting to feel a little tired. This should be the longest battle this time. And it seemed like no one would be able to do anything to the other in such a short period of time. The results were about to come out. They would probably have to wait for half a day. Shiroyuki Abe was also very clear about Xiaoqing's thoughts. After all, she wanted to fight a war of attrition. As long as one was not stupid, one could tell. However, Abe Shizuku couldn't do anything to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing was more slippery than anyone else. He couldn't trap Xiaoqing at all, let alone defeat her. As a result, the two of them could exhaust each other. And when they were almost exhausted, they would start to fight. Their abilities were purely used as support, and when it came to fighting, Shiroyuki Abe was no match for Xiaoqing. To put it bluntly, Xiaoqing had been through hundreds of battles, and she was incomparably proficient in fighting before the apocalypse. But Shiroyuki Abe? His status was very high, and he didn't need to do anything himself, let alone fight. Who would dare to offend him? As a result, it became Xiaoqing beating up Shiroyuki Abe, and Shiroyuki Abe could only rely on his dodging technique to escape. Originally, when the spectators saw Xiaoqing getting beaten up in the first half of the battle, their morale was very low. Some people even lowered their heads, unwilling to watch the result. After all, it was really embarrassing to be slapped in the face by a Japanese. As a result, the situation in the second half of the battle suddenly changed. Xiaoqing began to chase after Abe Shizuku. At this time, the two of them were in a very sorry state. After all, Xiaoqing's body was very strong, but her clothes were still ordinary clothes. Her clothes were torn, faintly revealing pieces of white skin. Abe Shizuku was also in a very sorry state, and the corner of his mouth was bruised. Then Shiroyuki Abe became angry. He had never been forced to such a state before. Shiroyuki Abe's hands formed a complicated seal, and suddenly, a huge earth-colored snake rose from the bottom of his feet. The earth python looked to be more than 2 meters tall, and Shiroyuki Abe stood on its head. However, the bottom of his feet was supported by wind energy, so he didn't land on solid ground. When he used this move, many people began to cry out in surprise. To be able to condense earth energy into such a huge python, and it was so lifelike, as if it was a living creature, it should be at least level 4, right? Xiaoqing frowned slightly. With a wave of her hand, a huge dragon made entirely of vines rose into the air and lifted her up. The two of them stood on the head of the python and rode on the dragon. Just looking at the scene, it was more shocking than the previous metahumans. Shiroyuki Abe pointed with his finger, and the python under his feet roared and rushed towards Xiaoqing. The dragon under Xiaoqing's feet also rushed forward, unwilling to be left behind. The earth python and the wood dragon intertwined in the air. You twist my tail. I wrap around your neck. It looked like they were evenly matched. As long as one side suddenly lost, that person would lose. Shiroyuki Abe also understood this logic. He folded his hands in his sleeves and looked at the dragon and snake with a cold gaze. His face was already pale because of the overdraft of his ability. Soon his face became even paler because Xiaoqing didn't just watch. She jumped up and landed on the python's head like a rock. With a punch, a crack immediately appeared on the python's head. After a few punches, the python's head caved in. If this continued, his python would die. No one had forced him to this point. Shiroyuki Abe quietly formed a second seal. In the entire island, he was also one of the top metahumans. It wasn't because his ability was outstanding. On the contrary, his ability was remote and not outstanding. It was a simulation. However, Shiroyuki Abe was the first person to combine yin-yang technique and his ability. After he chanted a few strange syllables, The earth python suddenly straightened its head. Starting from the top, it instantly turned dark green. Even the scales on its body became lifelike. In the next second, the giant python opened its bloody mouth and bit the wood dragon's head. Then it swung its head and slammed Xiaoqing to the ground. How hard was Xiaoqing's body? She smashed a big hole in the ground. If an ordinary metahuman was in such a situation, not to mention broken bones, at least they wouldn't be able to get up. Many people were very nervous. They looked at the big hole, and soon saw Xiaoqing climb out. Yes, she crawled out. Her clothes were ragged and her hair was covered in dirt. She looked a little ridiculous, but no one laughed out loud because Xiaoqing stood up. Her left elbow was fractured, and the broken bone had pierced through her skin and flesh, exposing her arm. Xiaoqing used her right hand to hold her left hand. With a fierce twist, her arm was righted. There wasn't even a trace of pain on her face. She calmly looked at Shiroyuki Abe and the big snake. She said that she wouldn't hold back this time. Chapter 208. No matter how strong Abe Shizuyuki was, after fighting for more than an hour, his power was almost exhausted. Besides, the intensity of the battle between the two of them was especially high. Xiaoqing moved her hands and feet, and the broken parts began to slowly heal. Only then did she walk forward. At this moment, in Abe Shizuyuki's eyes, Xiaoqing's eyes seemed to be emitting a silver-white light. It was very weak, but it was impossible to ignore. Abe Shizuyuki took a deep breath and pointed forward again. The silver-white, lifelike snake rushed out. The vines that soared into the sky immediately wrapped around the snake. Naturally, no one saw the black cracks between the vines. The vines entangled and twisted, and the snake turned into a pile of dirt. Abe Shizuyuki was stunned. He didn't expect the snake to be so weak. While he was in a daze, a spatial crack quietly appeared behind him. It quickly cut open a wound and then disappeared. If it was just that, it wouldn't be much. However, Abe Shizuyuki felt something enter the wound and grow unscrupulously in his body. Abe Shizuyuki instantly broke out in cold sweat. He used all his power to suppress the daughter in his body. Xiaoqing walked over step by step. Abe Shizuyuki knew that he had lost. If he wanted to fight, he wouldn't be able to suppress the daughter and would die. However, all his power was used to suppress the daughter. How could he block Xiaoqing's attack? I admit defeat. As soon as Abe Shizuyuki's voice fell, he felt the crazily growing thing in his body wither and shrink in an instant. Then it couldn't be found. Xiaoqing wiped the dust off her face. She looked past Abe Shizuyuki and looked at Dai. Her eyes were filled with gentleness as she walked over. Dai pounced over without saying a word, but there was a long chain locking him up. Xiaoqing's eyes flashed with a cold light. Without saying a word, she grabbed the chain. Her palm surged with the power of space and directly cut the chain. Dai smoothly threw himself into her arms and didn't go out. He had a lot of grievances and thoughts that he wanted to tell Xiaoqing, but he couldn't. The only way to express his feelings was to hug Xiaoqing tightly. Xiaoqing had been feeling very frustrated these days, but at this moment, she was completely relaxed. Xiaoqing didn't say a word and carried Dai back. She didn't even look at those island people, and naturally, she didn't notice the jealousy in Qiu Zhao's eyes. Yan Hanqing and the others had been waiting for a long time. When they saw Dai, they felt very happy. After all, they were a team, and Dai was also an important member of them. When Dai came back, the feeling of missing something was gone. To be honest, this battle wasn't as exciting as the previous few battles. Moreover, it had lasted for a long time, but no one was sleepy. Everyone's eyes were wide open, afraid that they would miss something. Xiaoqing didn't have any reputation in the capital. Of course, that was in the past. After today, she would definitely be included in the list of experts in the capital. Xiaoqing wasn't someone who liked to be in the limelight. As soon as she returned to her seat, she said to Kai Yingying, "We're really leaving this time. Let's meet again if we have the chance." Kai Yingying was also very desperate now. She carefully compared and found that in terms of appearance, she was not as good as Xiaoqing. In terms of strength, she was not as good as Xiaoqing. In terms of background, her father was a little more powerful, but he was not as powerful as Xiaoqing. More importantly, Yen Qiue had never looked at her. The girl was also a bit tactful. She immediately suppressed the sadness in her heart and nodded. She also helped to stop Kai Yingying's father, who wanted to talk to Xiaoqing in detail. Xiaoqing quietly slipped away with her people. If she didn't leave now, would she wait for this friendship competition to end and then be taken over by others? Chapter 209. Most of the paranormals present, especially the leaders of the mercenary groups, had the same idea. Take Mr. Kai as an example. Xiaoqing was a level 4 paranormal, and one of the strongest among level 4 paranormals. If he could get Xiaoqing to join his mercenary group and make her the vice leader, his mercenary group would become the 5th strongest mercenary group after the top 4 mercenary groups as long as Xiaoqing agreed to stay. He was not the only one with such ambition. There must be countless people who wanted to rope in Xiaoqing. If Xiaoqing didn't run away quickly, she would be harassed every day and would want to destroy the world. Therefore, Xiaoqing was smart enough to take Dai and the others out of Jingdu directly. When those paranormals realized what was going on, they were already gone. Xiaoqing was already outside Jingdu. She took her friends and ran all the way until they were far away from Jingdu. It was already noon. Yan Hanqing took Xiaoqing's place to cook, leaving Xiaoqing and Dai to sit together. Even Yan Hanqing reluctantly left some space for them. Dai hugged Xiaoqing and didn't want to let go. He kept rubbing against Xiaoqing's body. Xiaoqing tried to push him away, but he looked like he was wronged. Xiaoqing had no choice but to hold Dai in her arms again. Logically speaking, Dai was a zombie, and his body shape would not change. However, Xiaoqing felt that her Dai was thinner. When she held him, he was more painful than before. She pinched Dai's chin and looked at him carefully. The scar at the corner of his eye was not deep, but it could not be removed. Judging from the scar, it should be cut by something sharp. Even a zombie's constitution could not remove the scar. Xiaoqing rubbed it with her fingers. The scar wasn't deep, but it was painful. Dai immediately put his face in front of Xiaoqing. He wanted a kiss. Xiaoqing smiled helplessly and gently kissed Dai's eye. Okay? How old are you? Why are you still acting like a spoiled child? Oh right, I want to show you someone. Then she called Fu Jingma over. Fu Jingma was silent all the way until Xiaoqing called him over. When Fu Jingma saw Dai, his eyes became wet. He rushed forward and tried to hug Dai. However, Dai moved his butt and stuffed himself into Xiaoqing's arms. So Fu Jingma didn't. He didn't feel awkward. Instead, he said with reddened eyes, "Ah Shun, I'm your older brother. Don't you recognize me?" Dai looked at him curiously. His bright eyes were filled with confusion. In the end, he couldn't even be bothered to look at him. He stuffed his face into Xiaoqing's arms and rubbed against it. Fu Jingma couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He fell to the ground and asked softly, "How did this happen? I'm sure he's my younger brother, but he doesn't seem to recognize me." Xiaoqing stood up and looked down at Fu Jingma. Her expression was unreadable. She asked, "I'll ask you 2 questions. First, are you sure Dai is your younger brother? Second, are you willing to do anything for your younger brother?" Fu Jingma gritted his teeth and said, "He's definitely my younger brother. I let him down in the past. I didn't take good care of him. I owe him. Now that we're finally reunited, I'll do anything for my younger brother." "Oh." Xiaoqing bent down. "Can I do anything?" Fu Jingma nodded and looked at Xiaoqing seriously. Dai, who was clinging on to Xiaoqing, immediately stretched his head out. He suddenly opened his mouth and revealed his sharp fangs. His eyes were dark red as if they were stained with blood. His face instantly became ferocious and scary. Not to mention his older brother, even his biological parents would be frightened if they saw this scene. Especially with Xiaoqing as a comparison. One had clear eyes and a beautiful face, while the other had a ferocious look with fangs that gleamed coldly. Even though these 2 faces were clearly conflicting, when put together, they were unexpectedly harmonious. Chapter 210. Fu Jingma, on the other hand, was not afraid at all. He was very calm. Xiaoqing stroked Dai's head. When she looked at Fu Jingma again, her eyes were filled with malice. "Is it okay to be eaten up?" Fu Jingma bit his lower lip tightly. His voice was a little nervous and hoarse, but he said very firmly, "If my younger brother needs it, it's okay to do anything." Dai slowly inched closer to Fu Jingma. Fu Jingma could even feel Dai's cold breath on his neck. That area of skin gave him goosebumps. Fu Jingma gritted his teeth and did not move. When Dai was almost touching him, Xiaoqing hugged Dai and said calmly, "Since you are Dai's older brother, and now that you know this big secret, you can't leave even if you want to. Remember, if you want to escape and tell everyone what you saw today, I will kill you before you can say anything." In order to prevent Fu Jingma from revealing Dai's secret, Xiaoqing even planted a daughter seed in him. Even if he was Dai's older brother, she still had to be cautious. She had to leave a way out for herself. She would wait until she could really trust Fu Jingma after interacting with him for a long time. Only then would she remove the seed in his body. Fu Jingma did not say anything. He just stood up silently and patted the dust off his body. Then he asked softly, "Can I stay with my younger brother at night? We haven't seen each other for a long time. I want to be closer to him." Dai immediately hugged Xiaoqing's neck tightly and glared fiercely at Fu Jingma. He did not like Fu Jingma, and he hated even more that Fu Jingma actually wanted to separate him and Xiaoqing. As for brothers, could he eat them? He only wanted Xiaoqing, and that was enough. Moreover, Dummy was rejecting Fu Jingma from the bottom of his heart. He didn't like him, and he hated Fu Jingma getting close to Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing comforted Dai and said, "Dai doesn't know you now. If you two stay together and Dai goes crazy, you won't be able to handle it. So, let's wait until Dai is willing to acknowledge you." Fu Jingma looked down, seemingly a little disappointed. Xiaoqing brought Dai, who was like an octopus, to the place where Yan Hanqing was cooking. The table was already set up on the other side. Probably because he had been away from Xiaoqing for too long, Dai was even more clingy to Xiaoqing than before. He could not wait to occupy Xiaoqing's body all the time. His behavior provoked many people, especially Yan Qiyue. If he had not been suppressing his anger and jealousy, he would have already pounced on Xiaoqing and occupied the other half of her body. Even though he was suppressing it, when Yan Qiyue sat at the side, he kept looking at Xiaoqing and a certain part of her body with hidden bitterness. Yan Qiyue actually had a personality flaw. If he was allowed to develop, it was very likely that he would become the final boss of the story, just like in some novels. Hence, Xiaoqing could be considered to have gotten rid of the evil in advance. However, even though Yan Qiyue's personality had been restrained because of Xiaoqing, he was still a very extreme person. For example, now when he looked at Xiaoqing and Dai, he began to think of two ways to deal with them. He could either find a way to turn Xiaoqing into a normal person, or he could find a way to turn him into the same kind of person as Xiaoqing. In short, when he saw that Dai, as the same kind of person as Xiaoqing, was able to receive so much care from Xiaoqing, he wanted to bite the corner of the blanket and cry for a while. Ever since he found Dai, Xiaoqing did not look at him again. A great enemy. Xiaoqing comforted Dai for a long time before suddenly asking Yan Qiyue, "Can you think of a way to make food that zombies can eat?" Chapter 211. Little Bun and Dai were all similar to zombies. Little Bun was better, he could absorb food like milk, but she and Dai vomited everything they ate. "Let me try." Yan Qiyue was excited for a second, and then she said in a reserved manner, "Zombies absorb energy from flesh and crystals to maintain their lives and upgrade. I will study more on crystals and the flesh of mutant animals, and see if I can make something." Xiaoqing nodded. At this time, Yan Hanqing had already prepared lunch. Fu Jingma took the initiative to help and put the dishes on the table. The group was ready to eat. Fu Jingma didn't think so in the past. After all, Xiaoqing had always been eating because Kai Yingying and the others were by her side. She would vomit after the deed was done. Now that there were no outsiders by her side, Xiaoqing didn't even eat. The more Fu Jingma thought about it, the more frightened he became. Was Xiaoqing also a zombie? But even if zombies were different, at most, they would be like Dai, right? Their IQ was like a child's, and they couldn't speak. If Xiaoqing was also a zombie, then it was too scary. Thinking of this, Fu Jingma threw this idea to the back of his mind. During lunch, Xiaoqing and the others were discussing, should we go back to the S-City survivor base first? Or should we go to Jiangbei to report that we are safe? We can go to Jiangbei to report that we are safe. Let's go back to S-City. We haven't been back for so long, and it won't be good if the turtle dove occupies the magpie's nest, Gu Panpan said while biting her chopsticks. She had encountered this before when she went on a mission with her brother. After fighting outside for more than half a month, they came back and found that their house had been occupied. This kind of situation was common in the base. Most of the time, a group of paranormals would go out together and come back to divide the spoils of War of the Dead paranormals. Some paranormals with bad character would even go to the houses of the dead paranormals and loot them clean. Taking other people's wives and daughters had happened before. From this, it could be seen that it was a wise choice to find a group of reliable teammates. Although the base had tacitly agreed that those people could plunder the property of the dead paranormals, there were still many people who wanted to plunder the property of those who were still alive and hadn't returned for a long time. If Xiaoqing and the others were unlucky, it was very likely that they would encounter such people. This was also the reason why many paranormal teams liked to leave one person at home to guard when they were out on a mission. When Xiaoqing left, she took away most of the important things, such as the crystal stones that she had saved. However, there were still a lot of food that was not easy to bring out, so she stored them at home. If they were plundered, it would be infuriating. They were full of worries when they came, but now that they were all gone, their moods were naturally much better. The group of people walked back as if they were on a scenic tour. Occasionally, they would go out to hunt for wild animals for a sumptuous meal. At this time, it was rare to see animals that were not mutated. After all, nature was a very cruel place. Survival of the fittest was the law of the jungle. Those animals that were not mutated had been hunted and eaten in the early days of the doomsday, or were eaten by natural enemies. Some of the lucky survivors were gradually eliminated because of their weak physique. Now, almost all of the remaining animals were mutated. Mutation was a disaster for humans, but for animals, it was a carnival. Mutant animals of the same level could crush zombies, and in terms of strength, they could also crush paranormals of the same level. However, the intelligence of humans was beyond the reach of animals. Therefore, when paranormals of the same level fought with mutant animals, the outcome was not certain. What was even more terrible was that the evolution speed of mutated animals was faster than that of humans. Even zombies' evolution speed was a little faster than humans. There were 3 ways for human paranormals to evolve. The first was to exercise by themselves, which was the slowest way. The second was to absorb crystal stones, which was the most common way. The third was to absorb crystal nuclei, which was the fastest way. The crystal nuclei of the same type brought about the greatest progress for paranormals of the same type. However, humans were always bound by morality and bottom lines. Some people would secretly hunt and kill their own kind, but after all, they were a minority. Mutated animals and zombies could eat their own kind without any scruples. Therefore, their evolution was higher than that of humans. It was said that the highest level of mutated animals that had appeared so far was level 5. As for zombies, there were no rumors about them. Chapter 212. Xiaoqing and the others caught some mutant animals for food and went back smoothly. At this time, Xiaoqing naturally didn't know that the whole Jingdu was in chaos because of her, especially a certain acquaintance. He was in disbelief the whole time until Xiaoqing left. On the way back, the whole team was in turmoil. It was nighttime, so those who needed to sleep naturally had to sleep. There were 4 tents in total. Xiaoqing and Little Bun shared one, Gu Panpan and Xiaotong shared one, and the rest of the men were divided among themselves. But Dumbo threw himself at Xiaoqing without saying a word and hung himself on Xiaoqing. Yan Qiyue, who was originally quite reserved, also threw herself at Xiaoqing and hung herself on the other side. If Xiaoqing wasn't a zombie and was stronger than ordinary people with superpowers, the 2 men would have fallen to the ground. "What are you 2 doing?" Xiaoqing said helplessly. Erdai didn't know how to speak, so he stared at Xiaoqing with pitiful eyes. His eyes were full of, "We have been separated for so long. I really want you to sleep with me. Anyway, it's not the first time we sleep together. I can also help you look after little Bun. Xiaoqing wanted to refuse, but she couldn't think of a reason. She turned to look at Yin Qiuyue. Yin Qiuyue immediately said tearfully, "Previously, you were considerate of my body and slept with me. You even got up in the middle of the night to find medicine to make soup for me. Now that you have them, you don't want me anymore. I don't care, I want to sleep with you." Xiaoqing thought for a while, then tore the two men from her body and threw them out. Dai and Yin Qiuyue, who were thrown at the door, were speechless. Xiaoqing slept until 11 o'clock in the middle of the night. Xiaoqing's five senses were very sharp, so she immediately sensed that someone came in. She didn't even bother to move, because the person had already climbed to the double sleeping bag. This sleeping bag was modified, and was dismantled to look like a mattress on the floor. In the past, Dai also liked to sleep together. The three of them couldn't sleep together, so they had to dismantle it. As soon as the person came over, Xiaoqing knew that it was Dai without even opening her eyes. Dai was lying in front of the sleeping bag sneakily. He looked at Xiaoqing and her mother for a while, then he sneaked into the bed. When he first came in, he was afraid that he would wake Xiaoqing up and be kicked out, so he slept by the side with his limbs curled up. But soon he involuntarily turned into an octopus and wrapped himself around Xiaoqing's body. Not long after Dai came in, another person lifted the door curtain and sneaked in. This person was more decisive than Dai, and he crawled into the bed without saying a word. Then that person was stunned, because there was an Dai lying on Xiaoqing's body. As expected, the one who strikes first gains the upper hand. Yin Qiuyue gritted his teeth as he thought. Then he wrapped himself around Xiaoqing's other side. The two of them looked at each other, and neither of them was willing to show weakness. Lying in the bed, little Bun was very uncomfortable from being squeezed. He hugged Yiye and nudged Yin Qiuyue with his little butt. Xiaoqing reached out and scooped little Bun up and put him on her belly. Her action made the two men stiffen, and they wanted to shrink into a corner, so that they wouldn't be discovered. Xiaoqing put a finger to her lips and whispered, "Shoo, don't wake the baby up. Otherwise I'll kick both of you out." When the two men heard that, Xiaoqing tacitly agreed that they didn't have to go out tonight. They were instantly happy. They also knew that it was because of little Bun, so they were very well behaved and quietly shrank back. Little Bun slept very soundly on Xiaoqing's belly. He felt that the icy coldness under his body was very comfortable, and he purposely rubbed a few more times. Chapter 213. The night passed uneventfully. When Xiaoqing woke up the next morning, the men sleeping on both sides of her had become octopuses that wrapped themselves around her body. Xiaoqing wanted to get up, but she had to wait for the two men to wake up. She helplessly opened her eyes and counted the crystallic nuclei in the space for a while. When she finished counting the high-level crystallic nuclei, the two men woke up with a steamed bun. The first one to wake up was Dai. When he woke up, Yin Qiuyue also woke up. Dai was still in a daze, with a strand of hair sticking up on his head, which made Xiaoqing have an urge to rub his head. Yin Qiuyue, on the other hand, had a different style. He lazily lay on the side and yawned. The corners of his eyes were a little moist, which made him look especially charming. Both of them were the best men, but Xiaoqing acted as if she didn't see them. She carried little Bun and got up to move her body. If she wasn't a zombie, half of her body would be numb and stiff after one night. As soon as Xiaoqing walked out, the two men immediately followed her. Thus, when Xiaoqing opened the curtain, she attracted countless gazes. Gu Panpan and the others all looked at Xiaoqing and the two men beside her, especially the one who was in the same tent as Yin Qiuyue and Dai. Their eyes all revealed the same message. "I thought he woke up in the middle of the night to pee, but he ended up in Xiaoqing's tent. Shameless." Especially Gu Panpan, who couldn't wait to punch Gu Chuan. Why couldn't her brother learn from these two people and be thick-skinned and pester them? At least he could enter the tent and cultivate some feelings. Xiaoqing expressionlessly ignored those strange gazes, and then led little Bun, who hadn't woken up yet, to brush his teeth. Recently little Bun had a new hobby, which was to brush Yiye's teeth. As a mutated rabbit, Yiye was the boss of all the rabbits, but in little Bun's hands, It could only whimper and be manipulated. Little Bun pulled Yaya's three-petaled lips and squeezed some toothpaste onto his toothbrush. He brushed Yaya's front teeth very seriously. His sharp front teeth were brushed until they shone brightly, but Yaya's eyes had already turned white. Imagining a rabbit being forced to pinch its mouth to brush its teeth, Xiaoqing somewhat sympathized with Yaya. After the whole family brushed their teeth and washed their faces together, Xiaoqing washed her hands and prepared to make breakfast. The assistant was still Yan Hanqing. He squatted on the ground and picked the wild vegetables, then cut them into sections and slices them for Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing's group was the most leisurely paranormal team. Other than them, no other paranormal team could eat fresh porridge in the wild. The porridge wasn't plain porridge, but a variety of porridge such as spinach and shrimp porridge, vegetable porridge, fish porridge, 8 treasures porridge, and the most common porridge was all kinds of wild vegetable and meat porridge. It was almost different every day, which made Gu Panpan and the others' appetites very good. Even before the apocalypse, they didn't eat so much every morning. Xiaoqing was worried about their nutrition, so she often went to the nearby forest to get some bird eggs and wild eggs and cooked them for breakfast. There was no shortage of milk and other things. It was rare to see such a comfortable life after the apocalypse, and even more so among paranormal teams in the wild. When paranormal teams were in the wild, they would cook their own dry food, roast it, or eat it. At most, they would hunt some wild animals and roast them. It was rare to see someone like Xiaoqing, who was particular about the taste of the food, soup and dessert. Chapter 214. After breakfast, the group continued on their way. When they left, they also drove the car that they had driven here. There were 2 cars in total. One was driven by Yan Hanqing, and the other was driven by Xiaoqing. Just as Xiaoqing carried Little Bao into the car, Erdai and Yanqiue took the initiative to squeeze into the car. Each of them took a seat. Gu Panpan wanted to stuff Gu Chuan into the car, but with Xiao Tong in the car, there was no more space. Thus, she could only sit in the car driven by Yan Hanqing with her brother, Fu Jingma, and the others. Xiaoqing didn't need to look back. Through the rearview mirror, she could see Erdai sitting on the left, Yanqiue on the right, and Little Bao holding Yaya in the middle. Little Bao blinked his big eyes, looking left and right. Then he began to pout and crawled toward Xiao Tong's seat. Little Bao crawled into Xiao Tong's arms, and Xiao Tong hugged him with a faint smile on her face. Now in Xiaoqing's team, the one who improved the fastest wasn't Yan Hanqing, who had the lightning ability, or Gu Chuan, who had the ice ability, but Xiao Tong. She benefited from the special crystal hanging around her neck, and now, she was infinitely close to level 4. With a little stimulation, she could become the second level 4 ability user in the team. The one who improved the second fastest was Yan Hanqing. He turned from an ordinary person to an ability user, so he could endure hardships and was the most hardworking one. Without Xiao Tong's cheat-like abilities, he was the only one in the team who was second only to Xiao Tong. As for the slowest progress, it was probably Dum Dumbo. If zombies wanted to evolve, the fastest way was to eat human beings, especially paranormals. Human flesh and blood could provide them with a huge amount of energy, far more than the energy provided by zombie nuclei at the same level. Paranormals could provide them with even more energy. What was the relationship between Erdai and Xiaoqing before? Xiaoqing didn't know, but after following Xiaoqing, he definitely didn't eat even a bite of flesh, which caused his progress to be much slower than normal zombies. Now most of the zombies had evolved to level 2, and some of them had evolved to level 3. There were even quite a number of level 4 zombies, and some level 5 zombies. However, Erdai was still at the peak of level 2, which was why he was easily captured by Abe Shizuk's men. Although Erdai's fighting power was comparable to level 3 zombies because of his special body, he was still far behind other people. So, Erdai was actually a little depressed. A long time ago, when he first met Xiaoqing, he didn't even have emotions. But now, he had learned those complicated feelings, and even learned to keep the unhappy things in his heart. However, Xiaoqing was very clear about his situation, and she was already thinking of a way. She would never let Erdai eat humans. If Erdai ate humans, what was the difference between him and those ordinary zombies? Moreover, things like flesh and blood were addictive, Just like her, she had to drink some of Yin Chiyue's blood in a special situation. Now, every time there was a full moon, her thirst for blood would increase infinitely. Xiaoqing didn't want Air Dai to become like that. She hoped to maintain the purity of Air Dai. At least one day, if Air Dai returned to normal and remembered everything, he wouldn't find out that he had eaten his own kind. Xiaoqing was thinking while driving. Human flesh and blood could make zombies evolve. What about mutant animals? Could it also work? Soon, Xiaoqing denied this idea. She had eaten a lot of cooked mutant animals, but she spat them all out. Although she hadn't tried raw meat, the effect wouldn't be different just because it was raw. Chapter 215. Or the blood of mutated animals might be useful. After all, mutated animals contained a lot of energy in their bodies. Normal paranormals like Yan Hanqing often ate mutated animals, which was good for upgrading their superpowers. Xiaoqing thought about a lot of things, but all of this could only be confirmed after an experiment. While she was thinking, she suddenly saw a person lying on the road in front of them. It was a woman, wearing loose pink clothes, covering her belly with one hand. Her hair and clothes were a little dirty. Xiaoqing immediately stopped the car. Before she ran over the woman, Yan Hanqing also stopped the car. It might be a pregnant woman in front of us. Let's go and see. Xiaoqing got out of the car first, followed by Yin Chiyue and Air Dai. Xiaoqing hurried over and helped the woman up. Are you okay? Before the last word was finished, the pregnant woman suddenly stretched out her hands toward Xiaoqing. The nails on her hands were more than 10 centimeters long, sharp and gloomy. Under her disheveled hair was a half-rotten face. How was she a pregnant woman? She was clearly a zombie. Fortunately, Xiaoqing was very vigilant. A pregnant woman lying in the middle of the road was very sudden, so she would definitely be more vigilant. If the woman lying on the ground was not a pregnant woman, she would not even stop the car. Although she would not run over the woman cruelly, she would take a detour and leave directly. As soon as the pregnant zombie made a move, Xiaoqing kicked the zombie's chest, and then turned around and took 2 steps back. The zombie rolled on the ground, and a pillow rolled out of its bulging belly. It probably knew that Xiaoqing was not to be trifled with, so it got up and went into the woods by the roadside. After a few moves, it disappeared. Yan Hanqing and the others who came later hurriedly asked Xiaoqing, "Are you okay?" Xiaoqing shook her head. Her reaction was very fast, so she was not injured at all. The others heaved a sigh of relief, but Xiaoqing's heart was in her mouth. Everyone be careful. She was worried about nothing but the evolution speed of zombies. How long had it been? There were already zombies who could make such a delicate ambush. If the person who was ambushed was not Xiaoqing, she would probably die on the spot. After all, almost no one would suspect that a zombie would pretend to be a pregnant woman to deceive people. This zombie was definitely very intelligent. She even learned to put a pillow in her clothes and pretend to be pregnant. The intelligence of the zombies was already very scary. Don't forget that Xiaoqing and the others were still in a relatively remote place. The more remote the place was, the smaller the population, and the weaker the zombies that came out. The zombies near or in the big cities had eaten a lot of people in the early days of Doomsday. Their evolution speed was much faster than the zombies in these remote places. But the zombies in these remote places had already learned to deceive people. Then, how far had the zombies in the big cities evolved? It seemed that people were not scared when they said that there were already level 5 zombies. According to the evolution speed, level 5 zombies were normal. This encounter made Xiaoqing even more eager to become stronger. Although she was already strong among the superpowered people, the zombies were evolving. If she couldn't keep up with them, she wouldn't be able to escape the next ambush so easily. Xiaoqing now had a lot of people around her who needed her protection. She had no right to be capricious. She had to work hard. After going back to the S-City survivor base, we will take a big task. Xiaoqing took a deep breath and then said, on the way back, they would definitely encounter more zombies. When they encountered zombies, Xiaoqing would let Gu Panpan and the others fight. Then, she would see how much their strength had increased during this period. After all, one had to know oneself and know one's enemy in order to be victorious in every battle. Once Xiaoqing had a clear understanding of Gu Panpan's strength, she would be able to go back and accept missions based on their strength and go out to gain experience. Superpowered people could not become stronger by hiding at home and constantly absorbing crystals. Without going through life and death battles, superpowered people could not withstand a single blow. Think about it. One was a tree that grew tenaciously in the wind and rain, and the other was a flower that grew in a greenhouse. How could their fighting strength be the same? Xiaoqing hoped that each of her friends could grow into a towering tree. Then, even if there was an accident in the future, when they were separated, they could protect themselves. Chapter 216. Xiaoqing originally thought that the zombie who pretended to be a pregnant woman would know her place and would not appear again. She did not expect that at night, when Xiaoqing was sleeping, the curtain would be opened. For the past few days, the two men would go back to their own tents to sleep in the first half of the night. In the second half of the night, they would silently sneak into Xiaoqing's tent, one on the left and one on the right. They almost turned Xiaoqing into meat buns. But tonight was different. When the curtain was opened, a faint smell of blood mixed with a rotten smell floated in. Xiaoqing originally thought that it was Dai and Yin Qiyu, so she was too lazy to open her eyes. But once she smelled that smell, Xiaoqing knew that it was definitely not those two who came. This rotten smell of blood usually appeared on zombies. Xiaoqing immediately opened her eyes. The vines had already broken through the ground. The zombie that sneaked in did not face Xiaoqing directly. It lowered its head and rolled forward to avoid the vines. It reached out to grab Little Bun. Coincidentally, Yiya was lying on Little Bun's stomach sleeping. When the sound of something breaking through the air sounded, it opened its eyes groggily and instinctively took a bite. The zombie's flesh was stiff and rotten, so the taste must be terrible. After Yiya took a bite, it lay on Little Bun's stomach and vomited. This was probably the most disgusting thing it had ever tasted in its life. Yiya's bite exposed the zombie's target. The reason for its sneak attack tonight was actually Little Bun. Xiaoqing did not say anything and first threw out a lantern flower. That lantern flower was picked by her when she was in the forest. Because its color and shape were unique and it could glow at night, she kept it. As soon as the lantern was thrown out, it hung on the roof of the tent, and the pink light illuminated the entire tent. The zombie was also exposed. She was wearing a pink dress with a tattered collar. Her exposed chest was a mass of rotten meat. Xiaoqing was familiar with this zombie. Wasn't it the scammer zombie they met during the day? This zombie was very bold. It dared to attack them in the middle of the night after messing with them during the day. Xiaoqing wasn't going to let it go this time. She closed her fingers, and the vines that emerged immediately formed a cage-like cage, trying to trap the zombie inside. However, this zombie was very smart. When it saw Xiaoqing attacking it, it didn't even try to fight back. It just turned around and ran. However, it was unlucky. When it turned around, it ran into Dai, who was also attacking at night. Dummy was shocked. It reached out its paw reflexively and slapped Dummy back into the tent. Dummy happened to be caught by the formed cage. The zombie was still restless after being locked in the cage. It kept trying to use its claws and teeth to break the vines. However, Xiaoqing's vines were stronger than it expected. Its claws were almost broken, but it couldn't even scratch off a single thorn. Xiaoqing used the vines to hang the cage up and hung it at the entrance of the tent. After all, the scratching sounds made by the zombie would disturb Little Bao's sleep. After everything was settled, Xiaoqing opened the blanket and said to Dai, "Why are you still standing outside? Go to sleep." Dai didn't say anything and crawled into the blanket. He happily hugged Xiaoqing's waist. Originally, he tried to rub Xiaoqing's chest. In the past, he often used this action to take advantage of Xiaoqing. After taking advantage of her, he blinked his eyes and put on an innocent expression. However, this time he was slapped into the blanket by Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing used a lot of strength. Dai's face was facing down. His nose was sore. In the past, this move had always worked. Why didn't it work this time? Chapter 217. Before Dai could figure it out, Yin Qiyu also sneaked in. As soon as he arrived, he saw the cage hanging at the door and the zombie in the cage. He immediately adjusted his expression and rushed in with a worried face. Although Yan Qiyu knew that with Xiaoqing's strength, it was impossible for her to get hurt. After Yan Qiyu rushed in, she found a spot and prepared to plunge into Xiaoqing's arms to express her worry and fear. Of course, she could also use the excuse of checking if Xiaoqing was injured to take advantage of her. However, before he could jump into Xiaoqing's arms, he was slapped to the ground. Yan Qiyu was speechless. Xiaoqing didn't want to indulge them anymore. She pulled the quilt and said coldly, "Go to sleep." No matter how much they wanted to do, they had to go to sleep. The next morning, Xiaoqing got up and went to brush her teeth and wash her face. She also took a carrot and fed it to Yaya as a reward. After all, it did a good job last night. After washing up, it was time to deal with the zombie. If it hadn't tried to attack the little bun in the middle of the night, Xiaoqing wouldn't have minded it running away. However, it dared to attack the little bun, which crossed Xiaoqing's bottom line. Xiaoqing studied it carefully. It was only a level 3 zombie, but it had mutated a little, so it was a little smarter than ordinary zombies. After studying it, Xiaoqing cut it into pieces and took out the crystal. Yan Qiyu also dissected the zombie's body to study the reason why it became smarter. Then Yan Qiyu was beaten up, because when he was dissecting the zombie, the others were eating breakfast. Then he spread a mattress on the ground outside the tent and dissected the zombie. The air was filled with the smell of blood and rot, and the internal organs, especially the intestines, were all over the ground. It was a sour feeling. Gu Panpan took the lead and put down the bowl of porridge, then beat Yan Qiyu down. In fact, Yan Qiyu couldn't be blamed. All the researchers were like that. Once they were curious, they didn't care where they were, so it was reasonable that he was beaten up. After dealing with the zombie, Xiaoqing's heart was in her mouth. She found a very bad phenomenon. The little bun seemed to have a special attraction to zombies. It was like a foodie seeing delicious food, or a money grubber seeing gold. It was even more intense than that. Let's not talk about other zombies. Just this zombie's intelligence was higher than that of ordinary zombies, so when it first met Xiaoqing, it immediately ran away when it found out that Xiaoqing was stronger than it, and there were more of them. However, in the middle of the night, it couldn't resist its desire and sneaked back to attack the little bun. This proved that the little bun was very attractive to zombies. For this reason, Xiaoqing asked Dai. After all, Dai was the only one among them that was closer to ordinary zombies. Dai told Xiaoqing accurately that when he saw the little bun, he also had an impulse. His subconscious told him that if he ate the little bun's flesh and blood, it would bring him a lot of improvement. Moreover, as the little bun leveled up, the temptation would become even greater. However, Dai had intelligence. The biggest difference between humans and beasts was that humans could use their intelligence to overcome their desires, while beasts could only succumb to their desires. Dai could control his urges, but ordinary zombies couldn't. This was also the reason why there were zombies coming for the little bun. Chapter 218. Xiaoqing couldn't help but worry. Little Bun had become the target of zombies, and he didn't have much ability to protect himself. If he was left alone, it would be too dangerous. Little Bun also had a special ability that was similar to devouring. He could devour a lot of things such as superpowers and people's vitality. His devouring also worked on zombies, but the amount of energy he could devour was limited. Last time, when Little Bun devoured Xiaoyu in Linchuan Survivor Base, the energy in his body expanded for a long time before it was digested. Xiaoyu's level wasn't high. If it were a level 3 superpower user, Little Bun would probably only be able to devour a small part of the energy. If he tried to devour it forcefully, he would probably explode. When Little Bun reached level 3, he would be able to devour as much as he wanted. However, he couldn't devour too much, and his devouring ability would only work when he came into contact with the other party. This ability was actually quite useful. Most people wouldn't guard against a 4 or 5-year-old child. However, Xiaoqing couldn't bet that those people or zombies who had evil intentions towards Little Bun would show mercy to him. Therefore, how to protect Little Bun became a big problem. Especially zombies. If they caught Little Bun, their first reaction would probably be to eat him directly. Xiaoqing couldn't let her son be too far away from her. Not to mention her line of sight, it was best to keep him within a few meters. Only then would she feel at ease. It was useless to think too much. The best way to deal with it was to deal with it as it came. Xiaoqing thought about a lot of things, but in the end, she could only sigh and look at Yiye in Little Bun's arms. Although Yiye's fighting ability was pitifully low, it could still be of some help if something happened. Xiaoqing made up her mind to train Yiye. On the road this time, Yan Qiyue was the one driving. Then, Xiaoqing began to rummage through the stock. After rummaging through the stock, she opened Yiye's mouth and began to feed him. No, it was feeding him like a rabbit. The things she fed Yiye were all good stuff. Some of them were high-leveled zombie crystal nuclei. Most of them were around level 2. She and her companions had no use for them, but to Yiye, they were already high-leveled crystals. There were also some plants that were beneficial to the evolution of mutated animals, as well as the crystal nuclei in the mutated animals. In short, Yiye was in pain and joy the entire morning. After walking for less than half an hour, Yiye had already risen to pinnacle level 3. Although its pinnacle level 3 was not as strong as those ferocious large beasts because of its race, its attack power was definitely not as strong as those ferocious large beasts. Also, because it was filled with crystals, it was much weaker than the average pinnacle level 3 mutated beasts. Most importantly, Yiye was timid. When she thought about it, she suddenly felt that it was useless. It could be roasted and eaten. Yiye couldn't help but shrink its neck. It felt its anus tighten, and its entire body turn cold. Its rabbit fur couldn't help but stand up. After leveling up, Yiye was thrown back into Little Bun's arms by Xiaoqing. Yiye was still very happy at that moment. It was especially grateful to Xiaoqing. If it had succumbed to Xiaoqing's strength and didn't dare to escape, it wouldn't have done so now even if someone else asked it to. Soon, Yiye felt that it would be better to run if there was a chance. This was because during the afternoon break, Xiaoqing started to treat Yiye like a dog. The reason was that Yiye was already at level 3, but its combat ability was still very weak. Its reflexes and other aspects weren't high, so it still needed to go through a certain amount of training. Chapter 219. Thus, Xiaoqing caught a few mutated rats and cats and let Yiye chase after them. It was fine if they couldn't catch up, but they wouldn't be able to eat lunch or dinner. Whether they would be able to eat tomorrow depended on their mood. Yiye held back her tears and ran out like a dog. She would come back with a mutated rat in her mouth. And then she would come back with a mutated cat in her mouth. Those mutated animals would fight back. Yiye's face was scratched and she looked very pitiful. In the end, Little Bun felt sorry for Yiye and hugged Yiye tightly. Xiaoqing originally wanted to train a more qualified bodyguard to protect Little Bun, but he had no choice but to let Yiye go. Yiye looked at Xiaoqing with a bitter face the whole time. In the end, she lowered her only big ear and curled up in Little Bun's arms pitifully. At this point, it was necessary to talk about the recovery ability of different species. In the case of humans, after the apocalypse, even ordinary people's recovery ability was much higher than before the apocalypse. This was probably the adaptability of humans. Humans were constantly adapting to the environment, and their bodies evolved accordingly. Thus, after the apocalypse, most ordinary people's bodies were very good. At least, unless there were special circumstances such as an infection after an injury, or a weak body due to an injury, very few people would fall sick. The recovery ability of a psychic was much higher than that of an ordinary person. For the same injury, an ordinary person would need 10 days to recover, while a psychic would only need 3 to 5 days. However, Xiaoqing and Erdai only needed a day, or even a few hours. Not all zombies had terrifying recovery abilities like them. Because zombies were already dead, ordinary fatal injuries were no longer fatal to them. Many zombies had lost 4 limbs, half of their bodies, and even only had their heads left. They could still open their mouths and bite people. Only when their heads were smashed would they truly die. However, most of the zombies that lost a part of their body wouldn't grow it back. At most, they wouldn't be seriously injured, and they wouldn't be like humans, who lost too much blood and lost their ability to fight. That was all. A small portion of zombies had strong recovery abilities. They ate the flesh and blood of their own kind to replenish themselves. For example, there was a zombie that had a hole in its stomach. It ate its own kind, and then the hole in its stomach grew back. There were also similar situations. Mutant animals were different from humans and zombies. They would bleed when they were injured, and their flesh did not contain toxins like zombies. They would slowly recover after being injured. Most mutant animals recovered faster than paranormals. Yaya's face was badly scratched, but the next day, it was still alive and kicking. The wounds on its face were almost unrecognizable. Every time this happened, Xiaoqing couldn't help but look at the corner of Erdai's eyes. There was a long scar at the corner of his eyes, from his eyebrows to his cheek. It was almost a finger's length below his eye. According to common sense, Erdai's wound should have healed to the point that there wasn't even a scar left. However, the scar was still there. The scar wasn't ugly, but it made Erdai's handsome face look a bit more ferocious. Even if it was ugly, it didn't matter because Xiaoqing wouldn't mind. However, Erdai minded it very much. He often secretly looked at his own face through the reflection mirror. Every time he saw the scar, he couldn't help but show a disgusted expression. Especially when Yan Qiyue was sitting next to him as a comparison. His beast's intuition made him feel a huge threat from Yan Qiyue. Just like how a male animal would show his most majestic side to a female when he was courting her, Erdai always felt that he wanted to show his best side to Xiaoqing. However, it was obvious that the scar ruined his perfect side. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that the scar was very abrupt and ugly. In the past, Erdai never cared about his appearance. However, he started to care about it now. Although he didn't show it, Xiaoqing could feel it. For example, when he slept, he liked to sleep on the left side of his face. When he turned his face to the side, he would press the corner of his right eye against the pillow. This way, the scar wouldn't be exposed. Another example was when he sat next to Xiaoqing. He would deliberately turn his right face to the side, and use the left side of his face to face Xiaoqing. There were many situations like this. Even if Xiaoqing was slow, she would still notice it when it accumulated. Moreover, Xiaoqing was a very sensitive person. She noticed it early on. She didn't think that Erdai was being pretentious. However, she rarely saw Erdai like this. She felt that it was a little funny. Therefore, she had been secretly observing him. Erdai was obviously very confused. Especially the men around him. They were all very outstanding. If Erdai stood among a group of ordinary men, the small scar wouldn't be a big deal. However, when he stood among a group of outstanding men, the small flaw would be infinitely magnified. Erdai was very sad. Although he was a zombie and had the intelligence of a child, he had the intuition of a beast. He could tell if some people had bad intentions with just a glance. On the other hand, he could tell that some people had feelings for Xiaoqing. At least for now, none of the men around Xiaoqing were easy to deal with. In this kind of situation where he was surrounded by love rivals, Erdai was very anxious. Therefore, the flaw of a scar would be infinitely magnified in his heart. Sometimes when Erdai talked to Yan Qiyue or Gu Chuan, Erdai couldn't help but wonder if Xiaoqing was disgusted with him. Xiaoqing thought that his behavior was very cute. After all, Xiaoqing had never seen Erdai like this. Therefore, she felt that it was a little strange. However, after seeing Erdai for a while, Xiaoqing started to feel sorry for him. She didn't want to see him like this anymore. Xiaoqing touched her chin. How could she comfort Erdai? Chapter 220. Xiaoqing's method of dealing with it was very simple. She kissed Erdai's scar. Erdai was stunned at that time, and didn't come back to his senses for a long time. The one who reacted the most was Yan Qiyue. He was holding a half-peeled apple, but he crushed it with a crack. The pulp and core fell to the ground, and even the fruit knife was twisted by him. The mole at the corner of Yan Qiyue's eye became more and more colorful. He looked at Xiaoqing, feeling very wronged. Qing didn't even kiss him. In contrast, Erdai came back to life on the spot. He nestled in Xiaoqing's arms and was very happy, which made Yanqiu even more pitiful. He held the fruit knife that had become S-shaped and looked at Xiaoqing pitifully. His eyes were full of hidden bitterness and accusation. Xiaoqing kissed Erdai because she saw Erdai as family. Would you care about the propriety between men and women when you kissed your own brother? The second reason was to appease Dai. After all, Dai's depressed look was too pitiful. However, Yin Qiue was different. Yin Qiue had clearly said that he liked Xiaoqing. Yin Qiue was by Xiaoqing's side as a suitor. It was not appropriate to kiss Yin Qiue. So Xiaoqing looked straight ahead seriously, and chose to ignore Yin Qiue's sad little eyes. Yin Qiue actually persisted the whole way, looking at Xiaoqing with the same gaze. On the way back, they passed by Linchuan survivor base, but Yin Qiue didn't want to go back and take a look. Xiao Emo was too shrewd. He couldn't handle it. So they took a detour. However, they still had to find a survivor base to rest and reorganize. Xiaoqing spread out the map. This map was bought in the capital, and it showed most of the survivor bases in the country. As long as it was a proper survivor base of a certain scale, almost all of them could be found on the map. Small bases made up of bandits and robbers would not appear on the map. Of course, some of the more famous bandit lairs would be marked red to remind people to avoid these places to avoid getting hurt. What Xiaoqing needed to do was to find a well-reputed survivor base and rest there. Staying in the wild for a long time without fresh fruits, vegetables and other supplies, eating wild animals like barbecued meat all the time would be unbalanced. After all, it was a long way back. Xiaoqing stored some vegetables and fruits, but her space couldn't keep them fresh, and the quantity was limited. It was definitely not enough for them to get back to S City. Therefore, it was necessary to find a survivor base to rest and reorganize. Choosing a survivor base was also very important. First, they had to choose a survivor base with a good reputation. Secondly, if the survivor base was too far away from their route, it would be a waste of time. A small survivor base was not suitable for Xiaoqing and the others, because a small survivor base meant that they would have less supplies and less things to exchange. Xiaoqing was a very picky person when it came to living. She was used to giving good things to the people around her. Even in the apocalypse, she had to at least pick out all the things she needed. After looking at the map, Xiaoqing confirmed 2 or 3 targets, and then carefully selected them. She could make a decision on the way back. But the fact was that changes were beyond human control. Xiaoqing originally decided to go to a medium-sized survivor base. This survivor base had a good reputation, and the size was just right. It was very suitable for replenishing supplies. As soon as she made the decision, something happened. The situation was like this. Xiaoqing had distributed the fruits equally to everyone at noon, and the store was already empty. When she got into the car, she was still considering whether to speed up and go to the base first. Then, as the car was driving, a group of people appeared in front of them. Chapter 221. The specific situation was that there were a few young men and women in tattered clothes. They looked quite delicate, and behind them was a group of people dressed like dogs. The people at the front were leading dogs. The dogs were mutated and had long fangs. There was even saliva dripping from the fangs. Their gazes were very fierce. Among the young men and women, there was a young girl who looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. She seemed to have accidentally fallen down due to exhaustion. The other 2 girls were unwilling to leave her behind. They reached out to help her, but the people behind them let go. The ferocious-looking dogs pounced on them. Their actions were not an insult to their appearance. They were also very fierce. They bit the leg of one of the girls. The boys were also very loyal. They could have run away, but they turned around and helped the girl drive the dogs away. With this delay, the group of people was surrounded. Originally, Xiaoqing would not care about this kind of thing. He could not even protect himself in the apocalypse. How could he spare the energy to care about other people's business? However, what happened next deeply pierced Xiaoqing's bottom line. The group of people holding the dogs came up and held down the young men and women. They kicked and beat them while cursing. A group of bitches, run again, run again. Not a single one of you. But you have the guts to refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Run again. The young men and women were probably ordinary people. After resisting for a while, they were beaten up even more severely. The boys immediately protected the girl under them, and let the people beat and scold her. If it was just scolding and beating, it would have been fine. After the men vented their anger, one of them, who had buck teeth and yellowish front teeth, said, "These little bitches wasted so much of our time. 2 beatings is really going easy on them. Captain, why don't we do this? Since we're outside and no one can see, why don't we have a taste? The prettiest one will be yours, and we will divide the rest. It won't be in vain." As he said that, he rubbed his thighs and laughed. The man who was called Captain touched his chin and said with a straight face, "These are all good goods. We should bring them back and give them to the base leader. However," he smiled and said, "since everyone wants to try something new, and I'm not a pedantic person, there's a small forest up ahead. Let's go there." When he said this, those people began to understand and laughed lewdly. Those young men and women could not help but feel a little despair. They had escaped from the devil's claws with great difficulty, but now they had fallen back. 2 of the young men looked at each other, and a trace of ruthlessness appeared in their eyes. The 2 of them suddenly pounced on the 2 men in front of them from the left and right, and then shouted to the girls, "Run! Run separately. Run as many as you can." The men didn't expect them to resist. They didn't pay attention and were pressed to the ground. Although the girls were weak, they knew what situation they were in now. They also knew that it wasn't time for them to be pretentious. They immediately ran away. The men flew into a rage out of humiliation. One of them extended his hand and threw out a wind blade, which directly pierced into the neck of the youth who had pounced on him. Blood splattered on his face. The youth was also ruthless. He opened his mouth and bit the youth's throat. Puff! Another stream of blood spurted out. After all, the physique of a paranormal was relatively strong. He couldn't bite off the man's neck, and he couldn't even break the man's throat. He could only break the man's throat, and that was why blood spurted out. After his neck was bitten, the paranormal was completely enraged. A dagger that looked like a wind blade appeared in his hand. Then he grabbed the young man's neck and stabbed him in all directions. Chapter 222. Soon dozens of holes appeared on the young man's body, and he was about to die. Another young man wanted to imitate him. Before he died, he was able to bite the flesh of his enemy, but before he could do anything, he was kicked away. The kick was so powerful that the young man flew 2 meters away, and then he spat out a mouthful of dark blood. Obviously, his internal organs had been injured. How could the girls outrun the dogs? Soon, 2 of the girls were pounced on by the dogs. The dogs were smart enough to know that their owners needed the girls to keep their appearances intact, so they just held them down and didn't bite them. The other girl was luckier. She stumbled to the front of Xiaoqing's car. Seeing that the dogs were about to pounce on her, the girl shouted with a pale face, "Help!" Her voice was so mournful that even Xiaoqing couldn't bear to hear it. She didn't want to meddle in other people's business, but when she heard what happened, there was an unknown fire burning in her heart, burning very fiercely. Xiaoqing just gave a look, and Yan Qiyu tacitly took action, and directly crushed the mad dog. The scene was a little cruel. The ground was full of blood and flesh, and even the girl's clothes were covered. The girl sat on the ground, gasping for breath. She couldn't help but tear up. After all, she was still an underage girl. Even if she had experienced the apocalypse, her mentality wasn't strong enough to face these things head-on. After pausing for a moment, the girl immediately reacted. She crawled up, grabbed the car door, and begged with tears in her eyes, "Please save my friend, I beg of you." As she said, she seemed to be worried that Xiaoqing wouldn't help, so she knelt beside the car and kept kowtowing. She kowtowed very hard, and in a few moments her forehead was broken. Xiaoqing was about the same age as her, and her heart couldn't help but soften. She looked at Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing didn't say anything, but just pulled the girl up, and then threw Yiya out. "Do you see those 2 dogs? If you win, I'll give you an extra meal tonight. If you lose, I'll cut off your carrots for a week." Xiaoqing ignored Yiya's resentful gaze and threw it out. Yiya's level was higher than those mutated dogs, but that didn't change the fact that it was a rabbit. Yiya moved its lips and prepared to make a fierce expression to scare the 2 dogs. Before it could make a ferocious expression, the 2 dogs looked at it fiercely. "Yiya. Mommy QQ so scary. Xiaoqing leaned against the window and said leisurely, "A week's worth of radishes." Then Yiya rushed out without a word. It knew very well that its master's mommy meant what she said. If she wanted to cut off its radishes for a week, she wouldn't cut them off for 6 days and 33 hours. If it couldn't do what Xiaoqing said, it would probably really be cut off from its food. Yiya's only obsession in this life was its radishes. Whoever wanted to snatch its radishes was asking for its life. Hence, Yiya bared its rabbit teeth and rushed forward like a rabid dog. Oh, it was a rabid rabbit, and it jumped onto the back of one of the dogs. After it jumped onto the dog, Yiya started to scratch and scratch. It even bit the dog's ear and refused to let go. Just looking at its expression, it was exceptionally fierce. The dog was stunned, probably because it had never seen such a fierce rabbit in its life. It was stunned for a moment, then it let go of the girl and started to roll on the ground. The dog and the rabbit were fighting like hooligans, rolling on the ground. No matter what, Yiya was still a level 3 mutated animal. Compared to this level 1 mutated dog, its level was much higher. Even if Yiya's attack power was low, it could still crush this dog just by looking at its energy. Chapter 223. However, Yiya didn't know how to use it. It was only when it became ferocious that it bit off the dog's throat. After the ferocious Yiya bit one dog to death, it turned around and pounced on the other dog. This time it was much more experienced. It went up and scratched the dog's eyes. Its sharp claws directly poked the dog's eyes blind. In the end, both dogs were killed by the rabbit. The ability users who came 2 steps later looked at Yiya and were stunned. One of them subconsciously said, "Yiya, this rabbit has rabies, right?" They had never seen such a ferocious rabbit that could bite 2 dogs to death in one go. Looking at that wild single ear, then looking at those red eyes, and a pair of front teeth, it glared at them with a particularly ferocious expression. It was as if it would pounce on them and bite them as soon as someone gave the order. Xiaoqing was very satisfied. If it couldn't even handle 2 level 1 mutated dogs, then needless to say, it would be better to roast it and eat it. Fortunately, Yiya's performance was not bad. She stuck her head out and shouted, "Yiya, come back!" Yiya immediately ran back and burrowed its head into Little Bun's arms. Then, Xiaoqing grabbed its only ear and lifted it up. It had just bitten a dog, so how could it burrow into Little Bun's arms? No matter what, it had to brush its teeth first. Yiya was a little dumbfounded. Then Little Bun took it over to brush its teeth. Recently, Little Bun had been very fond of brushing Yiya's teeth. Every time it brushed its 2 big teeth, it would be especially bright. This time was no exception. Just as Little Bun was brushing Yiya's teeth, those people walked over. After they recovered from their shock, only anger was left. The buck-toothed man said angrily, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You didn't take good care of your rabbit, and let it out to bite people. He bit our dogs to death. Are you deliberately provoking us?" Xiaoqing stroked Yiya's rabbit ear and said lazily, "Which eye of yours saw our rabbit go out to bite people? You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want." Something seems to be wrong. Buckteeth was furious. It had always been them acting shamelessly in front of others, and this was the first time they had met someone who dared to act shamelessly in front of them. Buckteeth was so angry that he laughed. He pointed at the rabbit in Little Bun's arms. "Do you think we're blind? Or do you think we're easy to bully? I'm telling you, this isn't over." The captain glanced at the young man protected by Xiao Tong, reached out to stop Buckteeth, and said, "Do you know what kind of people die the fastest? Busybody." He finally understood that Xiaoqing was prepared to protect these people and oppose them. Her attitude was very clear. She wanted to save these young men and women. Xiaoqing was still lazy. She tilted her head slightly and said with a smile, "There's another kind of people who die faster, and that's people with cheap mouths. There's a saying that trouble comes from the mouth, do you know? You motherf asterisk her." Buckteeth was halfway through his swearing when a bright red handprint appeared on his face. He was hit and spun in a circle, but no one saw how Xiaoqing did it. "Even though I don't know who my mother is, the last thing I want to hear is someone scold me." Xiaoqing pushed open the car door, flipped her hair, and stood next to the girl. If you have the ability, you can say that again. I said F***CKU. Before he could say the last word, another red handprint appeared on the other side of Buckteeth's face, so he spun in a counterclockwise circle. If the first slap could be said to be because they were caught off guard, then they were unable to see it clearly. However, this time around, no one was able to clearly see how Xiaoqing did it. Buckteeth's face was swollen in an instant, and his head buzzed like a swarm of bees. The captain's face immediately turned ugly. He said with a gloomy face, "Your Excellency is not giving face to our survival base. First, face isn't given by others, it's earned by oneself. Second, what Shulin? I've never heard of it. Why should I give you face?" Xiaoqing said with a chuckle. Her gaze was very cold. It was the kind of bone-chilling coldness. Xiaoqing saw everything, including what they wanted to do to the girls, including the heavy blows they had dealt to the two young men. Obviously, it wasn't the first time they had done something like this. This kind of people, no, this kind of scum, living was a waste of air. It was better to send them to worship God. Xiaoqing already had the intention to kill, but Yan Qiyu wanted to kill even more. Buckteeth was not convinced. He still wanted to say something, but his head suddenly spun in a circle on his neck, and then fell to the ground like a ripe fruit. Yan Qiyu leaned on Xiaoqing with a frightened expression, and then said, "Oh, I didn't use much strength. How could he so scary, Ah Qing? I'm scared." Xiaoqing felt goosebumps all over her body when she heard that last syllable. She really wanted to stuff Yan Qiyu back into the car. The paranormals couldn't bear it any longer, especially when they saw the headless corpse suddenly spurt out a large amount of blood like a fountain, sprinkling all over the ground. Then, the corpse fell down with a loud bang. The head rolled around on the ground and was stained with its own blood, making it look even more ferocious. They were all people who killed without blinking, but when the dead person became one of their own, they felt fear in their hearts. They killed people like killing chickens, and then retribution came. They were killed by others like dogs. Chapter 224. What scared them even more was that Brother Buckteeth, who was already at the peak of level 2, had died so mysteriously that they didn't even see how the other party had attacked. If Buckteeth had died in a fight with the other party, they could at least figure out the other party's strength. However, Buckteeth had died just like that without even causing a splash. They couldn't help but feel a little horrified. Either the other party had some special means, or their strength was far above Buckteeth's. No matter which possibility it was, it showed that Xiaoqing and the others weren't to be trifled with. Thinking of this, these people retreated. They were cold-hearted people. Even if they looked at Buckteeth's body on the ground, they didn't have any thoughts of avenging him. The group looked at each other. Then the captain immediately said, "I think this is all a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings can be resolved. Why do we have to fight each other and make everyone unhappy?" "Oh," Xiaoqing chuckled and then said, "So it's a misunderstanding?" Her voice was very low and sounded a little dangerous. The captain's expression turned cold. He actually decisively threw out something that looked like a grenade, and then turned to run. The grenade-like thing exploded after it landed on the ground. White smoke spread out from it and choked people until they couldn't help but tear up. It turned out that it wasn't a grenade, but a tear gas bomb. This captain was quite a character. He was quite decisive in his actions. Xiaoqing accidentally fell for it. Although she wouldn't cry, she still felt quite uncomfortable. Xiaoqing waved her hand and fanned away the irritating gas. Then she released a qiantang. When the qiantang was fighting, its fragrance could cause the other party to lose the ability to resist. It could also stimulate the fighting power of her teammates. Of course, it also had a function of dispersing other bad gases. As soon as the qiantang was released, the others felt a faint fragrance replace the smell of the tear gas bomb. However, at this time those people had already escaped. The girl next to her immediately stepped forward and helped the other two girls up. The three of them ran over to the two young men. One of them was already on the verge of death, while the other was heavily injured, but not dead. The three girls immediately burst into tears. The five of them had escaped together. These two boys had always taken special care of the three of them, just like big brothers. Now in order to let them escape, these two competent older brothers had actually, Xiaoqing walked over. She only needed a glance to see that the young man with bloody holes all over his body was beyond saving. His injuries were too severe. Even if Hua Tuo was still alive, he would not be able to save his life. On the other hand, although the other young man's internal organs were injured, he only needed to rest for a while to recover. The young man himself also knew that he was just experiencing terminal lucidity. He tightly grasped the hand of one of the girls and gasped for breath. "Achi, in the future, find a reliable man to marry. I'll be relieved." The girl named Achi burst into tears. Her tears flowed all over the ground. She lowered her voice and said, "Little Liang, I won't marry. I won't marry. I'll be a widow for you for the rest of my life." The man's eyes were very gentle, but they were getting dimmer and dimmer. He had no time. With such a serious injury, he could only drag it on until now because of his obsession. Now that he saw that Achi was out of danger, he breathed a sigh of relief, and his vitality gradually faded away. If you meet a boy who is willing to give up everything for you, marry him. Chapter 225. The man didn't close his eyes until he died. He looked at Achi longingly, full of reluctance and nostalgia, which made people feel sad. Achi threw herself on his body. Her cries were heart-wrenching. Xiaoqing didn't know how to comfort her, so she took out some medicine to treat the other boy. Yan Qiue took out a cup from the car and poured water for the boy. The others also helped. The girl cried for a long time, and her eyes were swollen, but the man was dead. No matter how much she cried, it couldn't change the fact. The girl named Achi was quite strong. She solemnly thanked Xiaoqing, borrowed a shovel, and dug a deep hole on the side of the road to bury the man. In fact, she wanted to take him back to their hometown and bury him in the most familiar place. But in this era, she couldn't even protect herself. The only thing she could do was to bury him. At least the body wouldn't be destroyed by zombies or beasts. Xiaoqing watched the girl build a small grave with soil little by little, and his heart was full of mixed feelings. After burying the men, Xiaoqing got the complete story from them. The girl's name was Achi. The 5 of them had been captured by hunters and brought to the survival base in the vertical forest. Then, they would be sold as goods to superpowered people, or people with money and power. They would become playthings. There were 2 kinds of hunters. One was the zombie hunters. They hunted high-level zombies and then sold their nuclei. They didn't join paranormals or mercenary groups. They were a maverick profession. The other type of hunter, on the other hand, hunted ordinary people. This type of hunter was like a human trafficker. They would go around capturing ordinary people with delicate looks, and then sell them as playthings for others. Achi and the others were refugees. They didn't have any foundation or support, so they were targeted. After being caught, they didn't despair. Instead, they tried to escape. As a result, Xiaoqing witnessed the whole process. The vertical forest survival base wasn't large, but it wasn't small either. What was more coincidental was that the vertical forest survival base was near the one selected by Xiaoqing. The leader of the vertical forest survival base used to be a rapist. After the apocalypse, the whole country's system collapsed. Naturally, no one pursued the criminal. He just awakened his superpower, so he gathered a group of paranormals who were in prison with him at that time, and later awakened their superpowers and established the vertical forest survival base. On the surface, the vertical forest survival base wasn't large, but it was a very formal survival base. In fact, it had been doing some black-hearted activities, such as human trafficking. After catching ordinary people with delicate looks, they would train the most outstanding ones, and then sell them to high-level paranormals or dignitaries at a high price. Generally, they would sell the ordinary people or use them in the base. The base had always been doing this kind of business. Because the higher-ups of the base were all criminals, they didn't have any moral values. On the contrary, because of the apocalypse, they became more and more rampant. However, the leader of the base was very good at dealing with people. He sent resources or beauties to the higher-ups of the nearby bases. No matter when, the fact that people were soft-spoken and soft-spoken would never change. Therefore, the vertical forest survival base was still safe and sound. Therefore, a lot of people were victims. Not only girls, but boys who were more outstanding would also end up in the same situation. After all, there were always some people who liked to try new things. There were also some people who were interested in boys. There were also some female paranormals who had such needs. Chapter 226. Gu Panpan and the others gritted their teeth. They did not expect that in the apocalypse, there were still survivor bases that openly sold human beings. How many poor people were victims? We should have killed them directly. That would have relieved my hatred. Gu Panpan pouted and said, I was careless and let them escape. What a pity. Then we will go to the forest. Xiaoqing said decisively. Anyway, they had to choose a survivor base and then stop to rest. They could go to the vertical forest to see the situation. Anyway, the few places Xiaoqing had chosen were all near the vertical forest. If they could not solve the problem of the forest, they could go to other survivor bases to replenish their supplies. After making the decision, Xiaoqing said to the girls, From here to the north, there are a few survivor bases with good reputations. Your companions are injured, so you can go there to settle down. Her meaning was very clear. Although she saved these people, she didn't intend to bring them along with her. These people understood this very well, so they made a prompt decision and said, We have no way to repay you for saving our lives. If there's an opportunity in the future, we hope that we'll be able to help you. But please be careful, the base chief of Lilin is already at rank 4. Xiaoqing did not say much. She just gave them a few crystals. At least it was enough for them to maintain their lives in the new base until their lives were on the right track. This was the only thing Xiaoqing could do to help them. Xiaoqing wasn't a saint who would help everyone, but sometimes, it wasn't a bad thing to help others as long as it was within her power. At least, she could feel at ease. Everyone was struggling to survive in the apocalypse, so there was no need to be so cruel. After watching them leave, Xiaoqing decisively ordered the driver to go to the forest. Such a dirty place really aroused Xiaoqing's curiosity. She wanted to see and destroy it. If she could do it. How to say it, it was everyone's responsibility to clean up the trash. The vertical forest was not far from where they were. Before the sun had even set in the afternoon, Xiaoqing and the others had already reached the vertical forest. Normally, very few people would come to Shilin's survivor base. Firstly, it was located in a remote area. Secondly, the local survivors knew a thing or two about this base. Naturally, they wouldn't go to the thieves' den. In contrast, the inspection in the forest was relatively simple. As long as they could prove that they were paranormals, they did not need to check their bodies and could directly enter the base. Except for Fujingma, they were all paranormals, so Fujingma only needed to observe for a night. The others could directly enter the base. Fujingma stayed to observe. After the others entered the base, they rented an empty house. The atmosphere in the forest base was very strange. For example, at night, there was no one in the base could be said to be in the forest. Occasionally, a few people from the inspection team would pass by. Xiaoqing paid the money and got a key. Then, she followed the guidance of the base personnel and found the house they were going to live in temporarily. The group of people temporarily lived in the forest. Because of the limited room, Xiaoqing lived with Little Bun and Air Dai, which directly prevented the opportunity for Yan Qiuyue and Air Dai to climb on the bed. The two of them rarely behaved for a while. After settling down, Xiaoqing went out for a walk. She went out for a walk, not because she was too relaxed, but because she wanted to observe the location of the base. If there was a conflict in the base, how to leave. She also wanted to know if this base was really as evil as Achi said. Chapter 227. That face was exactly the same as Air Dai's, but Xiaoqing would never mistake it for someone else. Fujingma. The coldness in Xiaoqing's eyes exploded like a blizzard. She kicked Fujingma, who was about to speak, out of the room. Get lost. Even so, she was merciful because Fujingma was Air Dai's older brother. If it were someone else, they would have been torn apart by now. Fujingma's entire body hit the door frame, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He was a little weak, and there was a hint of sadness on his face. Why can he do it but I can't? How am I inferior to him? Get lost. At that moment, the corners of Xiaoqing's eyes turned red. She flung her sleeves and shut Fu Jingma out of the room. She was afraid that if she looked at Fu Jingma again, she would not be able to control herself and kill him. Because of Dumbo, Xiaoqing endured it, even if the grief and indignation in her heart was like lava, gushing out and burning her internal organs to the point of pain. What kind of person did Fu Jingma take her for? A slut? Or a prostitute? Xiaoqing's emotions were fluctuating so violently that the objects near her had cracks all over them due to the force released from her body. Even the door was the same. Fu Jingma sat outside the door expressionlessly. After a while he lowered his head. His eyes were dark and unreadable. After a long time, he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and left. Fu Jingma would often recall the time when he was very young. His mother would hold his hand as they walked into the luxurious house. Fu Jingshan would stand at the top of the stairs, his gaze cold and gloomy. His mother would stroke his head and ask him to call him brother. Then Fu Jingshan would throw a toy car down and hit him on the head. Fu Jingma was jealous. What right did Fu Jingshan have to have everything he wanted? Why was it that he could only be an illegitimate child who couldn't see the light of day, standing behind the scenes and watching how Fu Jingshan didn't cherish what he had? Those things that Fu Jingshan did not want were things that he could not get. This was true in the past, and it was true now. Even if Fu Jingshan had become a monster, a fool, he was still able to easily obtain what he wanted but couldn't. What Fu Jingshan got, he could not get even if he was shameless. Xiaoqing sat in the room for a long time before she slowly calmed down. After calming down, the first thing she did was to take all the pillows and blankets out of the bed and burn them all. The flame was a warm orange, and soon the pile of things was burned to ashes. Xiaoqing took out a few new quilts and laid them out, then went to the bathroom. The moment she thought about how Fu Jingma had bathed in this bathroom, she felt uncomfortable all over. She scrubbed the entire bathroom and soaked in the bathtub for the entire afternoon. After scrubbing off a layer of her skin, she walked out as if nothing had happened. When Xiaoqing went out, Fu Jingma was sitting by the table. His gentle gaze carried a hint of sadness. He said softly, "I cooked some porridge." Xiaoqing acted as if she didn't see him and walked out without stopping. When she passed by Fu Jingma, she clenched her fists, afraid that she wouldn't be able to control herself and would attack Fu Jingma. Xiaoqing originally wanted to go out and continue scouting to see if she could gather more information, but she was in a bad mood. Sometimes as she walked, she would think of the sticky feeling when Fu Jingshan kissed her toes. Then she would have the urge to vomit. More than that, she had the urge to kill someone. However, Xiaoqing did not want to look at Fu Jingma anymore. Thus, she walked outside until it was almost dark before she went back. When she went back, Gu Panpan and the rest had already returned and bought some things. Chapter 228. She leaned against the railing and said, "After I find the evidence, I'll organize this matter and report it to the capital. Then, I'll send Fu Jingma away. We'll talk about it again when Dai remembers." Although Yan Qiyue didn't know what had happened, he was very supportive of sending Fu Jingma away. It would be best if he was the only man left by Xiaoqing's side. "I think that's fine. But did he do something to make you angry?" Yan Qiyue asked tentatively. Xiaoqing's expression immediately turned ugly. What Fu Jingma had done really made her feel disgusted. Looking at Xiaoqing's expression, Yan Qiyue guessed a lot. He was a smart person and was very familiar with Xiaoqing. Putting the two together, he could more or less guess what had happened. Yan Qiyue's gaze turned cold as he said, "Did he come to look for you when we weren't around today?" Xiaoqing didn't say anything, but her expression turned even colder. Yan Qiyue had already guessed most of what had happened. He laughed coldly and said, "I knew that guy wasn't a good person. He's so scheming. As expected, his foxtail has been exposed. He dares to have such thoughts. It's better to send him away as soon as possible." No wonder he didn't like Fu Jingma from the first time they met. Not only did Fu Jingma have feelings for Xiaoqing, but he was also shameless. "Qing, did he do something to you?" Yan Qiyue leaned forward. Although he was asking, his thin red lips directly pressed against Xiaoqing's earlobe. The temperature was too hot. Xiao Qing turned her head away uncomfortably and said, "Why are you leaning so close?" Yan Qiyu lowered his voice and said, "Qing, you don't like it? I can get even closer." Then he was slapped by Xiao Qing. Yan Qiyu was speechless. The ambiguous atmosphere that he had worked so hard to create was gone just like that. Yan Qiyu was indignant. He was so close. He kissed her. Then he didn't have a chance because Air Dai came out of the shower. As long as Air Dai was around, Yan Qiyu could forget about getting close to Xiao Qing, let alone doing anything to Xiao Qing. Yan Qiyu had considered it many times. Air Dai was his biggest competitor. Although Xiao Qing had always treated Air Dai as family, he couldn't resist the temptation of being closer to her. Air had a special place in Yan Qiyu's heart. If he wanted to surpass Air Dai's place in Xiao Qing's heart places. This was a piece of news that made Yan Qiyu crazy with jealousy, but he had no choice but to accept it. Fortunately, Air Dai's intelligence was like that of a child's, so even when they fought, Air Dai's methods were like that of a child's. To Yan Qiyu, he still had the advantage. After giving up on getting close to Xiao Qing, Yan Qiyu quickly occupied one side of the bed. Air Dai also quickly occupied the other side. When Xiao Qing came back from the balcony, she saw two good-looking men lying on the bed, one on the left and one on the right, looking at her lovingly. So corrupt, it felt like an ancient king sleeping with his concubine, and it was a threesome. Xiao Qing silently complained about herself. Then she crawled under the blanket. The two men skillfully wrapped themselves around her. Sleeping together under the blanket was indeed corrupt. Before falling asleep, Xiao Qing kept thinking about how she had no dignity. She couldn't help but soften after being wrapped around by two pieces of sticky candy. She should have thrown them out. Otherwise, how could she? Air Dai was still young and liked to crawl under her blanket. However, Yan Qiyu was shameless and thick-skinned. She definitely couldn't tolerate him. The next night, when the two of them crawled under her blanket, Xiao Qing's heart softened again. She silently said to herself that she would tolerate them one more time. Chapter 229. Although it was like this every day. On the third day of entering the base, trouble finally came to the door. Xiao Qing had been wandering outside, collecting information and looking for evidence. The few paranormals who had run away from her were all recovering from their injuries. One of them went out to buy things and happened to see Xiao Qing. As soon as he saw Xiao Qing, he was scared and immediately reported it to his captain. The captain thought about it and felt something was wrong. Xiao Qing clearly had a grudge with them and knew that they came from the base. Why would she walk into a trap? Anyone with a little brain wouldn't do that, right? So the captain thought of a conspiracy. The more he thought about it, the more flustered he became. It was probably a guilty conscience. After he panicked, he reported it to his boss, the base chief, Han Lilin. After Han Lilin heard it, he also felt something was wrong. According to the captain, Xiao Qing should be a very smart person. Why would she walk into a trap? Unless she had a trump card to ensure that she could safely leave under the siege of the entire base. As long as she had a little brain, she wouldn't walk into the home of her enemy. Han Lilin asked his subordinates again, and the conclusion he got was that Xiao Qing had been wandering around recently. Although she seemed to be aimless, she had been approaching the place where they kept the slaves. Clearly, she had an ulterior motive. Han Lilin felt that Xiao Qing definitely had a trump card. So he couldn't go head-on with her. After thinking about it again and again, he called his subordinates to change the prey they caught to a safe place to lock them up. This was the opportunity that Xiao Qing had been waiting for. Her boldness had not been in vain. She had managed to scare a big guy out of the crowd. The number of boys and girls who were caught by Han Lilin's subordinates was really too many. When he moved them, he made a lot of noise. If Xiao Qing didn't notice it, it would be strange. This time, she didn't go out openly, but secretly rushed over to collect some evidence. The prey was driven out of one prison after another and transported out of the base. There should be another secret base outside the forest base. Xiao Qing secretly observed. Most of the youths and girls had suffered a certain amount of hardship. Some of them were emaciated, some wore ragged clothes, and some had a faint smell of blood on them. Obviously, they had been injured. Most of them were not allowed to eat until they were full. This way, they would not have enough strength, and the possibility of escaping would be smaller. Most of the young boys and girls here were young, and there were also some slightly older women mixed in. However, most of them were in their 20s. What made Xiaoqing even angrier was that some of them were clearly children. The youngest one looked to be around 11 or 12 years old. There were also some who were around 14 or 15 years old. The oldest was no more than 16 years old. These people were also crazy. They didn't even let children go. Xiaoqing quietly followed them. She saw that they sent the people to another secret base. This base was hidden in the mountains. It was probably one of Han Lilin's 3 burrows. Xiaoqing waited at the door for a long time. After a while, those guards came out one after another. They even carried out a few gunny sacks. In the past, Xiaoqing had seen that every afternoon, there would be guards carrying out a few gunny sacks. It was only today that Xiaoqing knew what was inside. It was all corpses. Because when one of the guards was carrying the gunny sack, he accidentally let go of his hand. From the gunny sack, a snow-white arm with bruises and a face fixed on pain and despair was revealed. It looked to be a 17 or 18-year-old little girl. The parts that were revealed were all injuries. At that moment, Xiaoqing almost couldn't resist the urge to attack. How evil and inhumane was this to do such a thing? Xiaoqing followed the guards all the way to a forest. There was a big pit in the forest, and flies were flying around the pit. The guards came to the side of the pit, opened the sack, and threw out the corpses inside. Then, they couldn't stand the strong stench, covered their noses and ran away. After they all left, Xiaoqing walked over. The pit was full of corpses. Some of them had already rotted to the point where only the bones were left. Some of them were still fresh. The same thing was that all the corpses had flies flying above them. These flies landed on the flesh and ate greedily. There were also maggots constantly wriggling on the rotting corpses. Those whose faces could still be seen were all young boys and girls. Without exception, they were all covered with scars. At a glance, it was obvious that they were tortured to death. Xiaoqing's accumulated anger had reached its peak. She knew that people's hearts were sinister. In this post-apocalyptic world, morality and law couldn't restrain some people. They would do some excessive things. However, Xiaoqing didn't think that this excessive thing would be so cruel. Looking at those dead boys and girls, they were already piled up at the bottom of the pit. Moreover, there were more boys and girls being sold as goods. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. This group of scoundrels, beasts, even if they lived in the 18 levels of purgatory, it wouldn't be enough to redeem their sins. Xiaoqing really wanted to bury them, but she also knew that now wasn't the time to act rashly. If because of this, they would alert the enemy and cause all their efforts to be in vain, then the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. She gritted her teeth and took pictures of the miserable scene in the pit. In the post-apocalyptic world, there was no signal on the phone. It was definitely impossible to make a call. However, basic functions like taking pictures were still usable. She took a few pictures before preparing to leave the place and go back the way she came. Han Lilin must have obtained a lot of benefits from selling human beings. If she could find his account book, then she could find all the culprits. However, the difficulty of this wasn't ordinary. Especially for Xiaoqing, it was very difficult for her to find such confidential information from Han Lilin. Just as Xiaoqing was about to leave, a pale hand stretched out from the pit. Chapter 230. If an ordinary person saw this scene, they would probably be scared out of their wits. However, Xiaoqing was very calm. She stopped and turned around to see a pale and bloodless hand grabbing the edge of the crater. Blue veins popped out, and after a while, a head stretched out. It was a young boy, at most 17 or 18 years old. His forehead and the tip of his nose were covered in fine beads of sweat, mixed with mud and blood. He was in a very sorry state. His upper body was hanging out of the pit, gasping for breath. He wanted to save some strength and climb out. But in front of him, a pair of white sneakers appeared. The boy was shocked. He risked his life to escape from hell. Was he going to enter the wolf's den again? The boy looked up and saw Xiaoqing's cold eyes. He was relieved. At least he didn't see Xiaoqing in the forest base. Miss, can you do me a favor and send me to the Kyoto survivor base? The boy said embarrassedly. I can't give you a good reward. You escaped from the vertical forest? I'll ask you a few questions. If you answer honestly, I'll send you to the Kyoto survivor base. Xiaoqing didn't care about the boy's dirty body. She pulled him out of the pit. This place was too dangerous for communication. Xiaoqing took the boy deep into the forest where they wouldn't be easily found. Then she put the boy on the ground. How much do you know about the dirty trade in the forest base? The boy hesitated for a moment. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said to Xiaoqing, I came from the south. I have relatives in the Kyoto survivor base. I was going to seek shelter with them, but I was caught by the hunters in the forest on my way here. I don't know much about the others. There were about 50 victims who were locked up with me. They were all in their teens or 20s. Not long ago, 20 girls were taken away. I don't know if they are alive or dead. This time, I planned to escape for a long time. Today, someone wanted to rape a young girl. I took the opportunity to stop them, and sure enough, I was beaten. Originally, I was going to pretend to be dead, but they suddenly got some news and wanted to take everyone away. In the chaos, I got into the sack and pretended to be a corpse. The boy carefully thought about it, and told her everything he knew. With his own strength, it would be difficult to safely reach the Kyoto survivor base and find help to save those poor people. If Xiaoqing had bad intentions, then he could only blame himself for being blind. If Xiaoqing could fulfill her promise and take him to the Kyoto survivor base, then those poor people would have a better chance to be saved. He could only take a gamble. Anyway, his life was in the hands of Xiaoqing. He had no other choice. Those guards changed shifts 4 times a day. They changed shifts at noon, 6 in the afternoon, 12 in the evening, and 6 in the morning. Usually the guards are very strict. The boy said in detail, Many of those who were caught with me have died. Many were taken away. Now there are not many left. After me, many more young girls were brought in. Among them, there were a few who were outstanding, but they were taken away by Han Lilin and the other higher-ups. I'm afraid. When he finished, Xiaoqing's eyes lit up. She lowered her voice and asked, Do you have a way to contact the girls around Han Lilin? That account book could not be obtained by others, but if it was Han Lilin's lover, there was a great chance to get it. The boy hesitated, then gritted his teeth and said, After asking me so many questions, can you tell me what you want to do? Chapter 231. Xiaoqing didn't mind the young man's suspicions. She just told him what she had encountered before and expressed her thoughts. Finally, she said, If we get the account book, the evidence will be more sufficient. Moreover, we can also catch those who have dealings with Han Lilin in one fell swoop. So if you have a way to contact them, please be sure to tell me. The teenager thought for a long time, and then said, I can contact one of them. Her name is Xie Chunyan. We were caught together, and we have a good relationship. With her personality, I'm sure she'll be willing to help us. Xiaoqing nodded, and then said, It's not convenient for you to appear in the base openly. Tell me how to contact her, and then give me evidence that she can believe. I'll send someone to send you to the capital. We'll work together. The teenager told Xiaoqing how to contact Xie Chunyan. After the discussion, Xiaoqing took out a new set of clothes for the teenager to change into, and then she went back to find Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan. Yan Hanqing was a very reliable person, and Gu Chuan, although indifferent and quiet, was also very reliable. Xiaoqing told the two of them about the situation, and then entrusted the teenager to them. From here to the capital, it was a few days' journey. Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan cooperated. As long as there were no accidents, it would be easy to send the teenager back. After Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan left, the first thing Xiaoqing did was to contact Xie Chunyan. Although Xie Chunyan was caught, she was very beautiful. Han Lilin loved her very much, so he gave her a certain amount of freedom, allowing her to walk around the base when she was free. Of course, she was only allowed to walk around when there was someone watching her. However, Han Lilin didn't let her come in contact with the teenager. The only thing she could do was to ask someone to send the teenager some medicine. On this day, after Xie Chunyan had dinner, she prepared to take a walk outside. Not far behind her, there were 2 bodyguards, who were actually monitoring her. Xie Chunyan was very upset. No matter who it was, being held captive would not be in a good mood. The reason why she often walked around this area was because there was a field of flowers planted here. Although they were all small flowers with single petals, when they were connected together, they were also very beautiful. It could always relieve her agitated mood. She walked around the flowers and sat on a bench in the middle of the sea of flowers. As soon as she sat down, her butt was poked. She reached out and touched it. It was a paper ball. Xie Chunyan was a cautious person. She quietly picked up the paper ball and unfolded it when the 2 bodyguards weren't looking at her. After reading the words on it, Xie Chunyan walked to the toilet. When the 2 bodyguards were about to follow her, they heard Xie Chunyan say, "Do you want to follow me to the toilet?" Her eyebrows were charming, but at this moment, there was a little fierceness in them. The 2 bodyguards shrank their heads. Although they wanted to say something, they did not dare to offend Xie Chunyan. After all, pillow talk was very scary. Besides, Xie Chunyan was an ordinary person without superpowers. She was also a delicate girl. Where could she go? Xie Chunyan went to the toilet alone, and then saw Xiaoqing, who had been waiting for a long time. Although this place was dirty, it was the only place where the 2 of them could meet without being suspected. Xie Chunyan looked at Xiaoqing vigilantly. "Who are you? Why did you call me here in such a way? What do you want to do?" "I'm Cheng Guanyan's friend." Cheng Guanyan was the teenager who was sent to the capital. Xiaoqing's eyebrows softened, and then she said, "I have something to ask you for help." Chapter 232. What's the matter? Xie Chunyan let down her guard a little, but still looked at Xiaoqing vigilantly. Xiaoqing said, "Here's the thing. I want to bring down Han Lilin and save those innocent boys and girls, so I hope you can help me take the account book away from Han Lilin." Xie Chunyan immediately became more vigilant. She pursed her lips and said, "I don't know Cheng Guanyan, and I don't know what you're talking about. You should go. I'll pretend I didn't hear anything." Xiaoqing also knew that if she made Xie Chunyan believe that she was Cheng Guanyan's friend and asked her to do such a dangerous thing, Xie Chunyan would definitely be suspicious. She didn't think that Xie Chunyan would believe her immediately. On the contrary, if Xie Chunyan believed her immediately, she would have to worry about whether it was a trap or not. She would have to worry about whether Xie Chunyan could do it. "I'm indeed Cheng Guanyan's friend. He asked me to thank you for the medicine. And the name Xie Chunxiao is very nice." Xiaoqing said so, and Xie Chunyan's eyebrows relaxed. If there were 1 or 2 people who knew that she sent medicine to Cheng Guanyan, then she only mentioned the name Xie Chunxiao to Cheng Guanyan. "Where's Guanyan?" Xie Chunyan was a little friendlier and asked. "I went to investigate this matter today and happened to see the guards throwing the body away. Cheng Guanyan faked his death to escape, so I met him. I've sent someone to escort him to the capital with some evidence. After all, it's not suitable for him to come back to Lilin." After Xiaoqing finished her explanation, she said, "I hope you can help me get that account book and catch all the culprits in one fell swoop. Don't miss out on some of the more well-hidden ones who are still out there." Xie Chunyan thought for a long time and said, "I'll find a chance to take out the account book these days. That bastard hid the account book very well. I can only try my best." "Thank you," Xiaoqing said sincerely. Xie Chunyan shook her head. "It's hard to say whether you'll succeed or not. I just hope you can save those poor girls and boys, and I hope you can kill that bastard Han Lilin." "Of course." Xiaoqing handed a dagger to Xie Chunyan. "It's for self-defense. If you encounter any unexpected accident, it's better than being empty-handed." Xie Chunyan took it. Before she left, she said, "For the next few days, come here every day after 6 o'clock in the evening to take a look. If I get the account book, I will put it under the sink. You take the account book and leave quickly." Xiaoqing noted it down seriously. She watched Xie Chunyan leave, and then left quietly. After Yan Hanqing left, she was the only one who knew how to cook. Xiaoqing went back and cooked several dishes. Fortunately, dinner was not too late. After dinner, Everyone was supposed to go back to rest. Xiaoqing quietly called the few of them, except for Fu Jingma, to her room. After calling everyone over, Xiaoqing briefly told them what had happened before and what she was going to do. After getting the account book, they were going to leave. However, if the account book was exposed, it would alert the enemy and cause Han Lilin to transfer them again. Xiaoqing originally wanted to forge a fake account book to see if she could buy some time. However, time did not allow her to do so. She did not have the time to do so. She had to think of another way. More importantly, Han Lilin was watching them now. It would not be easy to escape unscathed. After a general discussion, they went back to their rooms. The next afternoon, Xiaoqing went to take a look. The account book had not arrived yet. On the third afternoon, she went to take a look. On the sixth day, an account book appeared under the sink. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.